There was a time when the only thunder on this island was the sound of the waves breaking against the coral reef. Long before the horizon filled with shadows of iron and steel, the island of Saipan was a quiet cradle of green, floating in the endless, warm expanse of the Pacific Ocean. If you had stood on its shores in those gentle years, you would have felt nothing but the soft, steady breath of the trade winds, carrying the sweet scent of rain and blooming plumeria. The world beyond these shores felt like a distant rumor, an impossible story told to children. Here, time did not march forward. It simply circled, moving in the slow, familiar rhythms of the tides, the sun, and the changing seasons. The morning always began softly. Before the sun fully crested the velvet peaks of the central hills, a fragile, silver light would spill across the water. The island did not rush into the day. It stretched, it breathed, and it slowly opened its eyes. In the small coastal villages, the day was announced not by alarms or sirens, but by the quiet sounds of life stirring. You could hear the sweeping of a broom against the hard-packed earth, the soft murmur of a mother singing a lullaby to a restless infant, and the gentle clatter of wooden bowls as families prepared for the morning meal. These were a people deeply tethered to the land and the sea. Among them were the Chamorro and Carolinian families, whose ancestors had navigated these vast, starlit waters for thousands of years. They knew the island's secrets. They knew which winds brought the silver fish into the shallows, and which moons signaled the time to harvest the breadfruit. In the cool, misty hours of dawn, fathers and sons would walk down to the water's edge, carrying nets woven by hand, the rough twine familiar against their calloused palms. They would wade into the warm, crystalline water, casting their nets in a wide, graceful arc, watching them settle over the coral like a breath released. They did not speak much in these hours. There was a quiet companionship in the work, a shared understanding that the ocean provided, just as it always had. Further inland, away from the salt spray, the landscape transformed into an endless, rolling sea of emerald green. This was the sugar cane. Planted by the hands of thousands of immigrant farmers, many who had traveled far from the islands of Okinawa and mainland Japan to find a better life, the cane fields dominated the island. When the wind blew down from the mountains, the tall, leafy stalks would sway and rustle, creating a sound like a soft, collective whisper brushing against the sky. In the heart of these fields, life was a tapestry of hard work and simple, quiet joys. Imagine a young father, his skin baked golden brown by the relentless equatorial sun, his hands rough and stained from the earth. He pauses in his cutting, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of a worn sleeve. He looks down the row and sees his wife, her face shaded by a wide woven hat, smiling as she hands him a simple gourd filled with cool water. In that brief, passing moment, as their fingers touch against the rough surface of the gourd, there is a profound, unspoken love. It is the love of shared burdens, of building a life from the soil up, of hoping that the sweetness of the harvest would mean a warmer winter, a new dress for their daughter, or simply another peaceful year together. The air in the fields was heavy and sweet with the smell of the cut cane. It was a fragrance that settled into everything, into the clothes hanging on the lines, into the wood of their small, modest homes, into the very skin of the people. At midday, when the sun was a bright, heavy weight pressing down on the shoulders, the workers would find shelter under the sprawling, ancient branches of a banyan tree. Here, in the cool, dappled shade, they would rest. They would open small, cloth-wrapped bundles of rice and salted fish, sharing whatever they had with their neighbors. There was laughter, the gentle teasing of old friends, and the sharing of letters that had arrived on the last supply ship. A young girl, perhaps no older than 17, might carefully unfold a piece of fragile, creased paper. It is a letter from her grandmother, far away across the ocean. She reads the words silently to herself, her lips moving ever so slightly. The letter does not speak of grand things. It speaks of the cherry blossoms blooming back home, of an uncle's minor ailments, of a recipe for sweet beans. But to the girl sitting in the dust of the sugarcane field, that piece of paper is a treasure. It is a fragile thread connecting her quiet, isolated world to the home she remembers only in fragments. She carefully folds it back into a tiny square, placing it near her heart, carrying the warmth of those mundane, beautiful words with her as she returns to the harvest. As afternoon slipped into evening, the island softened. The harsh, bright light of the day mellowed into a thick, golden syrup that poured over the landscape. The shadows grew long and deeply purple. This was the time for the children. They were barefoot and wild, their laughter echoing through the narrow village streets. They played games with pebbles and sticks, they chased each other through the tangled roots of the mango trees, and they ran down to the beaches to search for cowrie shells left behind by the retreating tide. Their faces were smeared with dirt and fruit juice, their eyes bright with the innocent, boundless joy of a childhood untouched by the anxieties of the adult world. Think of a small boy, sitting on the porch of his wooden house, carefully carving a tiny boat out of a piece of driftwood. His grandfather sits beside him, smoking a pipe that smells of damp earth and sweet tobacco. The old man watches the boy's small hands work, offering a gentle word of advice, guiding the dull knife. There is no rush. There is nowhere else they need to be. The boy looks up, showing his grandfather his work, and the old man's eyes crinkle with a warm, approving smile. It is an ordinary moment. A moment so completely unremarkable that no history book would ever record it. Yet, it is the very essence of life on the island, the quiet passing of love and knowledge from one generation to the next, undisturbed by the currents of the wider world. When night finally fell over Saipan, it was a profound, enveloping darkness. The sky above was not dimmed by city lights, it was a vast, velvet canvas dusted with millions of brilliant, icy stars. The Southern Cross hung low on the horizon, a faithful guide for those who still sailed the dark waters. The air grew cool, bringing relief from the heat of the day. Windows and doors were left open to welcome the night breeze, which carried the chorus of tree frogs and the rhythmic lullaby of the crickets. Inside the small homes, families gathered around the soft, warm glow of kerosene lamps. The light flickered over their faces, casting gentle shadows against the woven walls. This was a time for storytelling, for mending clothes, for quiet reflection. A mother might sit by the window, rhythmically brushing her daughter's long, dark hair, humming a melody that her own mother had taught her. A husband might sit at the table, carefully balancing his meager accounts, his wife resting her hand gently on his shoulder in a silent gesture of support. They were simple lives, built on a foundation of deep, enduring affection and a profound respect for the land that sustained them. But even in this paradise, if you listened very closely, you could hear a subtle change in the wind. It was not a storm, not yet. It was just a feeling, a slight chill in the warm air. The older generation, those who remembered the shifting tides of empires, began to look out toward the horizon with a quiet, lingering worry. The ships that arrived in the harbor were no longer just bringing rice and cloth, they were bringing men in uniform, they were bringing iron, they were bringing heavy machines that tore at the earth. The adults spoke in hushed, hurried whispers when the children were not listening. They noticed the new airstrips being carved out of the sugarcane fields, the dark scars in the green earth. They noticed the strangers walking through their villages with maps and measuring tools. A mother, hanging her laundry on the line, might pause and stare out at the gray silhouettes resting in the distant harbor, a sudden, inexplicable knot tightening in her chest. She would quickly shake her head, as if trying to physically dislodge the fear, and force a bright smile as her children came running around the corner of the house. They did not want to believe that the outside world could reach them here. They clung to the familiar, comforting routines of their daily lives, hoping that the rhythm of the harvest, the laughter of the children, and the steady crashing of the waves would somehow be enough to keep the approaching shadows at bay. They planted their gardens, they patched their roofs, they wrote their letters home, pouring all their love and resilience into the small, beautiful world they had built. As the night deepened, the island fell into a profound slumber. The sugarcane stopped rustling, standing still under the canopy of stars. The ocean continued its timeless, rhythmic breathing against the coral reef. In their beds, the people of Saipan slept, dreaming of the harvest, of silver fish in the shallows, of families reunited. They slept wrapped in the fragile, beautiful illusion of peace, completely unaware that the world they knew, the quiet, gentle island of sleeping shadows, was living its final, twilight hours. The dawn would soon bring a different kind of thunder, but for now, in this suspended moment in time, there was only the night, the breeze, and the quiet, steady beating of human hearts in the dark. Out in the boundless dark of the Pacific, the water parted with a soft, steady sigh beneath the hulls of 1,000 silent ships. Far from the gentle shores of Saipan, an immense, floating city of iron and steel crept across the midnight sea. If you were a bird flying high above the clouds, you would see no lights, no grand display of power. You would only see the vast, ink-black tapestry of the ocean, broken by the long, white ribbons of wake trailing behind vessels that moved as one, guided by the ancient, silvery light of the stars. The ocean was calm, offering a gentle, rhythmic rolling that rocked the great ships side to side, a slow and heavy cradle suspended between the deep water and the endless sky. On the open decks of these ships, the night air was cool and thick with the scent of salt and damp canvas. Here, leaning against the cold, dew-kissed railings, were thousands of young men. In the quiet hours of the night, stripped of the noise and the bright glare of the day, they were not soldiers. They were simply boys. They were sons, brothers, and young fathers, standing at the edge of the world, staring out into a horizon they could not see, but could feel drawing closer with every turn of the heavy brass propellers beneath them. The silence on the deck was profound, but it was not empty. It was filled with the soft, steady hum of the ship's engines, a deep, vibrating heartbeat that traveled up through the steel floorboards and settled comfortably into their chests. It was filled with the gentle sloshing of the waves meeting the bow, a soothing, repetitive whisper that sounded like a deep breath being drawn in and slowly released. And it was filled with the quiet, private thoughts of boys far from home, grappling with the profound mystery of tomorrow. Tucked away in the shadowed corners of the deck, hidden from the wind, small, cupped hands shielded the fragile, flickering golden flames of matches. The brief flare of light would illuminate a face for just a fraction of a second, a youthful cheek dusted with freckles, a tired brow, eyes that carried the soft, unmistakable weight of longing. A cigarette would be lit, its tip glowing like a tiny, dying star in the dark, and passed silently to a friend. They did not need to speak. The simple, shared warmth of the smoke, the brief brush of fingertips against a familiar hand, the quiet exhales vanishing into the sea breeze, this was their language. It was a promise made in the dark, a gentle reassurance that whatever waited for them on the unseen shore, they would not face it alone. Below decks, the world was a different kind of quiet. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of wool blankets, polished leather boots, and the collective breath of hundreds of sleeping men. The bunks were stacked close together, suspended by canvas and chains, swaying gently with the rhythmic motion of the sea. In the dim, blood-orange glow of the night lights, the sleeping quarters looked like a cavern of shadows. Walk softly down these narrow, metal aisles. Listen to the symphony of resting humanity. You hear the deep, rhythmic breathing of a boy from the open plains, his chest rising and falling in perfect time with the rocking of the ship. You hear a sudden, sharp intake of breath as another boy shifts in his sleep, murmuring a name, a mother's name, or perhaps a sweetheart's, before settling back into the quiet depths of his dreams. Here and there, a solitary figure sits awake, his back pressed against the cold, curved steel of the hull, his knees pulled tightly to his chest. In the faint light, you can see one young man carefully unfold a piece of paper. It is worn at the edges, soft as cloth from being touched so many times. He rests it on his knee, producing a small, stubby pencil from his chest pocket. He leans in close, his eyes squinting in the dimness. He is writing a letter home. He does not write of the vast armada, or the cold guns, or the heavy weight of the helmet resting by his boots. Instead, his pencil scratches softly against the paper, bringing the distant, beautiful world of his home into this cramped, steel room. He writes to ask if the leaves have started to turn in the front yard. He asks if his younger brother has fixed a broken spoke on his bicycle. He tells his mother that he misses the smell of her kitchen on a Sunday morning, and he tells his father that he is remembering to keep his head down and his boots dry. With every word he writes, he builds a fragile, invisible bridge across the thousands of miles of dark water. He pours his love, his quiet hopes, and his gentle, unspoken fears into the simple loops and lines of his handwriting. He pauses, touching the tip of the pencil to his lips, searching for the right words to say how much he loves them, without making them worry. Finally, he simply writes, "I will be home soon. Keep the porch light on." He folds the paper meticulously, sliding it into an envelope that he places inside his shirt, right against his heart, letting the warmth of his family guard him through the night. A few bunks down, another boy holds a different kind of treasure. It is a small, black and white photograph, encased in a waterproof sleeve. He holds it with the utmost reverence, as if it were made of delicate glass. In the picture, a young woman stands on a sunlit sidewalk, smiling brightly, holding a small bundle wrapped in a white blanket. It is a child he has never met. A daughter born while he was sailing across this endless ocean. He traces the outline of his wife's face with his thumb, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her hair falls across her shoulder. He looks at the tiny, sleeping face of the infant, a profound, aching tenderness blooming in his chest. In the quiet belly of this warship, surrounded by the iron and the sleeping men, he is just a father, overwhelmed by a love so vast it makes him close his eyes and breathe out a slow, trembling sigh. He silently promises the photograph that he will hold them both. He tucks the picture safely away, closes his eyes, and lets the rocking of the ship lull him into a peaceful, hopeful sleep. Up above, the night wears on. The ocean remains entirely indifferent to the cargo it carries. It does not know of the fear, or the courage, or the letters written in the dark. It only knows the pull of the moon and the sweeping breath of the wind. Among the men still awake on the deck, walks a quiet figure. He does not carry a rifle. His uniform is the same, but his collar bears a small, dull silver cross. The chaplain moves like a gentle shadow among the boys, his footsteps soft against the steel plates. He stops by a young man leaning heavily against the bulkhead, his shoulders slumped in quiet anxiety. The chaplain does not offer grand speeches about glory or righteous causes. Instead, he simply stands beside the boy, leaning against the cold metal, and offers his presence. "Can't sleep," the chaplain whispers, his voice smooth and warm, like a cup of tea on a winter morning. The boy shakes his head slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the black horizon. "Just thinking, Father. Just thinking about how far away everything is." The chaplain nods, raising a hand to rest it gently, reassuringly, on the boy's shoulder. It is a simple, human touch, but in the vast, isolating expanse of the ocean, it means everything. It is an anchor. "The stars are the same," the chaplain says softly, pointing up at the glittering canopy above them. "The exact same stars shining down on your roof back home are shining down on us right now. You are never as far away as you feel." They stand together in the quiet, watching the starlight dance on the surface of the black water. The boy's shoulders slowly relax, the tight knot of fear in his chest loosening just a little. He murmurs a quiet thank you, taking a deep, steadying breath of the salt air. The chaplain gives his shoulder one last, comforting squeeze before continuing his slow walk down the deck, offering a listening ear, a gentle smile, and a whispered blessing to anyone who needs it in the dark. As the deepest hours of the night begin to slip away, a profound stillness settles over the Armada. Even the most restless minds finally succumb to the heavy, soothing sway of the ocean. The boys curl up in their coats, using their canvas packs as pillows, dreaming of front porches, of warm kitchens, of sweethearts waiting by the train station. They dream of the beautiful, ordinary lives they left behind, their minds painting pictures of golden wheat fields and quiet, snowy streets to replace the gray steel that surrounds them. The horizon remains a mystery, hidden behind the veil of the night. But for now, the journey is paused in the realm of dreams. The ships glide forward, silent guardians carrying a precious cargo of youth, hope, and quiet resilience. The wind whispers softly through the riggings, a gentle lullaby for the brave, tired hearts resting below. Sleep now, young men. Let the ocean carry your burdens for a while. The dawn will come when it must, bringing the island out of the shadows, but in this sacred, suspended hour, there is only the peace of the deep water, the watchful eyes of the stars, and the beautiful, fragile beating of 1,000 hopeful hearts dreaming of home. There is a specific, heavy silence that lives only in the pale moments just before the sun breaks the edge of the world. In the lingering shadows of the early morning, the vast Pacific Ocean shifted from ink black to a deep, bruised indigo. The stars, which had watched over the sleeping fleet all through the night, began to gently fade, one by one, dissolving into the cool, gray mist that clung to the surface of the water. The air was perfectly still, carrying a damp, heavy chill that settled into the wool of collars and the canvas of heavy packs. Ahead of the waiting ships, the island of Saipan was not yet a place of earth and stone, but a dark, sleeping silhouette, a soft smudge of charcoal resting quietly against the bruised horizon. This was the hour of the descent. From the towering, iron walls of the great transport ships, thousands of young men began their slow, deliberate climb down the rough, woven squares of the cargo nets. They moved in absolute silence, a quiet procession of shadows suspended between the sky and the sea. The thick, salt-crusted ropes burned mildly against their palms, a small, grounding sensation in a morning that felt entirely like a dream. Below them, waiting in the churning, dark water, were the small, flat-bottomed landing craft, bobbing rhythmically on the ocean's gentle swells. Stepping off the net and into the small metal boat was like stepping into a different world. It was a space so confined, so deeply intimate, that every boundary of personal space simply vanished. The men filed in, 30 to a boat, packing together until they were sitting shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. The cold steel walls of the craft pressed in around them, but within that metal shell, there was the profound, radiating warmth of human bodies pressed close together against the morning chill. Listen to the sounds of this small, floating world. There is the low, steady, thrumming vibration of the diesel engine, a sound that rumbles up through the floorboards and settles deep in the chest, mimicking the beating of a slow, heavy heart. There is the rhythmic, splashing slap of the ocean waves against the blunt nose of the boat, a hypnotic sound, like the deep, steady breathing of the ocean itself. And beneath the mechanical hum and the water's gentle breath, there is the rustle of life. You can hear the soft clinking of a metal canteen against the belt buckle. The dull, leather creak of a rifle sling being adjusted over a tired shoulder. And, if you lean in very close, you can hear the sound of breathing. It is the collective, trembling breath of youth. Some breaths are shallow and quick, catching slightly in the throat. Others are long, slow, and measured, pulled in through the nose and released into the cold air as a faint, white mist. In these boats, as they slowly begin to circle in the water, waiting for the invisible signal to move forward, every man is an island of private thought, yet entirely tethered to the men beside him. They are boys who, just a few years ago, were delivering newspapers in quiet suburban neighborhoods, or guiding plows through the dark, rich soil of Midwestern farms, or walking sweethearts home under the amber glow of street lamps. Now, they are here, wrapped in canvas and steel, floating on a sea they had only ever read about in geography books. Look closely at their hands. In these final, suspended moments, hands seek out comfort. One young man, his helmet pulled low over his eyes, reaches a bare, trembling hand into his breast pocket. His fingers trace the familiar, smooth edges of a worn wooden rosary. He does not pull it out, he just holds it there, close to his heart. His lips move in a silent, continuous rhythm, whispering ancient prayers that his grandmother taught him by a warm fireplace. He isn't asking for glory. He is simply having a quiet, desperate conversation with the heavens, asking for the grace to be brave, and asking that the ocean return him to the people he loves. Beside him, another boy holds a smooth, gray river stone. He had picked it up from the shallow creek behind his childhood home on the day he left. His thumb rubs back and forth over its polished surface, feeling the cool, solid weight of it. As he closes his eyes, the smell of the diesel exhaust and the salt spray fades away. For just a moment, he is back in the green, dappled shade of the willow trees. He can hear the cicadas humming in the late summer heat. He can taste the sweet, metallic tang of the well water. He holds the stone tighter, using it as an anchor, a physical piece of home to keep his spirit from drifting away into the terrifying vastness of the morning. The ocean does not rush them. It lifts the small boat up on a gentle swell, suspending it for a breathless second, and then lowers it softly back down into the trough. The rocking is almost maternal, a slow, swaying lullaby that belies the reality of where they are going. Toward the front of the craft, sitting near the heavy steel ramp, is a young squad leader. He is barely 21, but the quiet gravity in his eyes makes him look much older. He looks down the two rows of faces facing each other in the dim light. He sees the pale, tight jaws, the wide, unblinking eyes staring at the metal floor, the way they grip their rifles so tightly that their knuckles have turned completely white. He knows words are useless right now. No grand speech can quiet the fluttering wings of a frightened heart. Instead, he leans forward just an inch. He catches the eye of the boy sitting directly across from him, a boy who is shaking so softly that his canteen rattles against his hip. The squad leader offers a small, slow smile. It isn't a brave smile or a confident one. It is simply a kind one. He reaches across the narrow aisle and rests his hand firmly on the boy's trembling knee. The touch is warm and steady. He gives the knee a gentle, reassuring squeeze, and gives a single, slow nod. The boy looks at the hand, and then up into the leader's eyes. He nods back. He takes a deep, shuddering breath, and the shaking slowly begins to subside. In that simple touch, there is a profound promise: I see you. You are not alone. We will walk onto that shore together. As the light begins to stretch further across the sky, turning the clouds from gray to a soft, bruised purple, the engines suddenly shift their pitch. The low idle turns into a deep, forward growl. The wide, slow circles end. The landing craft turns its blunt nose toward the silhouette of the island. The movement forward changes the air in the boat. The ocean breeze picks up, blowing cool and damp against their faces. The mist that had settled on their helmets begins to stream off in tiny, glittering droplets. The island of Saipan is no longer a shadow, it is taking shape. They can see the jagged line of the distant mountains, the dark green canopy of the trees, and the long, white ribbon of the coral reef where the deep ocean waves break into foaming lace. Time begins to stretch, pulling tight like a silken thread. Every second feels like an hour, every inch of water crossed feels like a mile. The men do not look over the edge of the boat. They keep their heads down, entirely focused on the few square feet of space they occupy. The silence among them is absolute now. It is a sacred, heavy quiet. Two friends, boys who had played baseball together in the dusty lots of Brooklyn, find themselves sitting side by side. Without looking at each other, one shifts his weight, sliding his shoulder firmly against his friend's shoulder. The contact is solid, grounding. The other leans back into the pressure. They sit there, locked together, finding an immeasurable strength in the simple, physical presence of someone who knows their favorite song, someone who knows the name of their family dog, someone who knows the exact shape of their life before this metal boat. They are silently absorbing each other's fear, sharing the weight of it so that neither has to carry it alone. The water beneath them is changing. The deep, dark indigo of the open ocean begins to lighten, turning into a pale, translucent turquoise as the boat passes over the submerged coral reef. The waves grow shorter, choppier. The scent of the air shifts, too. The pure, clean smell of the open sea is suddenly mixed with the scent of wet earth, of crushed leaves, and the sweet, humid breath of the tropics. The land is reaching out to them. As the shore draws agonizingly close, a profound sense of surrender washes over the men. The waiting is almost over. All the letters written in the dark, all the whispered prayers, all the tears shed in the silent belly of the transport ships, they all culminate in this single, suspended moment. They take one final, collective breath. They pull the cold morning air deep into their lungs, holding it there, feeling the life coursing through their veins. They are so young, and yet, they carry the entire world within them. They carry the gentle smiles of their mothers, the quiet pride of their fathers, the soft, tearful promises of the girls they left behind at the train station. They hold onto these memories tightly, wrapping them around their fragile hearts like a shield. The engine roars louder, fighting the pull of the shallow tide. The boat surges forward, riding the crest of a final, gentle wave. The ocean gives them one last, swaying push, delivering them from the sanctuary of the water to the edge of the unknown. The men close their eyes, bracing themselves, their shoulders pressed tightly together, bound by a quiet, beautiful love for one another, as they wait for the heavy steel ramp to finally fall. The very first step onto the shore was not a march, but a heavy, stumbling fall into a world that felt remarkably like a waking dream. When the heavy steel ramp of the landing craft finally fell forward, it did not crash. To the boy standing inside, waiting with breathless anticipation, the metal seemed to lower itself in agonizingly slow motion, slicing through the mist and plunging into the crystalline water. And then, the ocean rushed in to meet them. It was not the biting, freezing water of the northern seas they had imagined, but a current that was impossibly warm, soft, and inviting. It swirled around their heavy canvas trousers and leather boots like a gentle embrace, completely at odds with the heavy, pounding rhythm of their anxious hearts. Stepping off the ramp and into the shallow surf, the world suddenly shifted. The roar of the engines behind them, the thunderous sounds rolling down from the distant hills, the shouts of the men, all of it seemed to become muffled, as if the air itself had turned into thick, clear water. It was a surreal, disjointed silence. The boys moved through the surf with a heavy, dragging slowness, pushing against the warm current. Their legs felt like they were made of lead, their soaked uniforms pulling them downward, while their minds floated somewhere high above, detached and floating in a haze of pure, overwhelming shock. They waded through water that was a breathtaking, luminous shade of turquoise. Below the surface, shadows of ancient coral reefs bloomed in delicate, vibrant shapes. It was a postcard-perfect paradise, a place of stunning, quiet beauty that had suddenly been intruded upon by thousands of frightened young men. As they trudged forward, watching the water foam white against their knees, many simply stared down at the rippling surface, mesmerized by the delicate silver fish that darted away from their heavy boots. It was easier to look at the beautiful, indifferent life of the ocean than to look up at the towering, smoking shoreline that waited for them. When their boots finally left the water and touched the dry earth, the sensation was entirely unfamiliar. This was not the dark, rich soil of a Midwestern farm, nor the gray, packed dirt of a city street. It was coral sand. It was coarse, blindingly white, and loose, shifting away beneath their weight so that for every 2 steps taken, they seemed to slide 1 step back. The tropical sun beat down upon them, radiating off the pale sand with a fierce, heavy glare that made the air shimmer and dance. Falling onto the beach, pressing their exhausted bodies against the dunes, the boys tried to make themselves as small as possible. The sand was hot against their cheeks, smelling of salt, crushed shells, and the sweet, burnt scent of the island's foliage. In this strange, blinding landscape, the vast machinery of the invasion simply faded away into the background. What remained, what truly mattered, narrowed down to the space of a few feet, and to the boy lying in the sand right beside them. In the midst of the swirling, chaotic haze, human connections became the only anchors tethering these young men to reality. Imagine a boy, no older than 18, lying on his stomach, his chest heaving as he struggles to catch his breath. His helmet has slipped askew, and his eyes are wide, glassy, and unblinking, staring at a small, intricately patterned hermit crab that is slowly, methodically dragging its shell across a piece of sun-bleached driftwood just inches from his nose. The boy is frozen, entirely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of where he is. Suddenly, a hand reaches out and grasps his shoulder. It is a firm, warm, grounding touch. The boy looks up and sees his oldest friend, a boy he used to trade comic books with on rainy Sunday afternoons. His friend does not yell over the noise. He simply scoots closer, pressing his shoulder against the frightened boy's side, creating a small, impenetrable wall of human warmth. He reaches out, gently adjusting the heavy helmet back into place, and offers a small, tight, but deeply tender smile. "Stay close to me," he whispers, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the surf. "Just keep looking at my back. We're going to take a walk together, just like we're heading down to the corner store. Just stay close." The boy nods, a single, hot tear carving a path down his cheek, cutting through the mixture of sweat and coral dust. The paralysis breaks, washed away by the simple, profound reassurance that he is not alone. They rise together, moving as one clumsy, heavy entity, their hands briefly brushing, drawing invisible strength from the friction of their canvas sleeves. A few yards down the shoreline, another quiet story unfolds in the pale sand. A young medic, his own hand shaking so fiercely he can barely open his canvas pouch, kneels beside a fallen companion. The medical training, the diagrams and textbooks, all seem to vanish from his mind, replaced by a deep, instinctual need to simply offer comfort. The wounded boy is not crying, he is just staring up at the bright, cloudless canopy of the sky, looking incredibly tired. The medic does not rush. Moving with a deliberate, sorrowful gentleness, he takes his own canteen, unscrews the cap, and drips a few drops of the lukewarm water onto the boy's parched lips. He uses the soft edge of his sleeve to wipe away the wet sand clinging to the boy's brow. "It's all right," the medic murmurs, his voice a soft, rhythmic lullaby. "You're doing so well. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Look at how blue the sky is." He takes the boy's hand, holding it tightly between both of his own, rubbing the cold knuckles to keep the warmth flowing. He stays there, whispering stories of home, of quiet porches and cool evening breezes, building a sanctuary of words right there on the edge of the world, refusing to let the boy feel the cold, heavy hand of fear. All across the shoreline, this quiet reliance was the true heartbeat of the morning. It was found in the sharing of a dry match, passed from trembling fingers to trembling fingers. It was found in the way one boy would instinctively reach out to grab the heavy pack of another who had stumbled in the loose sand, pulling him upright before he even had time to realize he was falling. It was 1,000 tiny, invisible threads of love and brotherhood weaving together to form a net that caught them all. As the morning crept onward, the ocean continued its rhythmic, indifferent breathing, washing over the chaotic footprints left in the sand. At the water's edge, a small, white rectangle tumbled in the foam, catching the eye of a passing soldier. He paused, bending down to retrieve it from the wet sand. It was a letter, soaked through with salt water, the ink already beginning to run and blur into soft blue clouds. It had slipped from someone's pocket in the struggle through the surf. He held it delicately in his wet hands. He could just make out the elegant, looping handwriting of a woman, a mother, a sister, a sweetheart, asking about the weather, promising to bake a cherry pie for his return. The soldier didn't know who the letter belonged to, but in that moment, it belonged to all of them. It was a fragile, dissolving piece of the gentle world they had left behind, a world that felt like it existed on another planet. He didn't throw it away. With a quiet, reverent sigh, he carefully folded the damp paper and placed it inside his own helmet liner. He carried it not just as a piece of paper, but as a sacred proxy for a stranger's hope, keeping it safe from the ocean that tried to claim it. There was no grand, cinematic charge off the beaches. It was a slow, agonizing crawl into the dense, green fringes of the island. The sand gave way to creeping vines and the thick, twisted roots of the coastal trees. The air here was perfectly still, devoid of the ocean breeze, and suffocatingly hot. The boys dug into the soft earth beneath the trees, creating shallow, temporary homes in the dirt. They lay on their backs, staring up at the sunlight filtering through the broad, waxy leaves of the breadfruit trees. The initial shock of the water, the sand, and the surreal arrival began to slowly ebb away, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion that settled into their very bones. They were here. The endless, terrifying journey across the ocean was over, and the mysterious silhouette of the island was now the solid earth beneath their backs. They looked at one another in the dappled green shade. Their faces were painted with white dust and dark earth, their eyes hollow but remarkably clear. They did not need to speak to understand the profound shift that had just occurred in their young lives. The island had taken them in. In the quiet, heavy heat of the late morning, a gentle quiet settled over the small groups of men hiding in the foliage. They unlaced their wet boots, they checked their pockets for photographs, and they leaned their tired heads against the shoulders of the boys sitting next to them. The sorrow of the beach was behind them, a difficult memory already beginning to blur into the edges of a dream. Ahead lay the dense, mysterious heart of the island. But in this fleeting, suspended hour beneath the leaves, they simply breathed. They listened to the rustle of the wind in the canopy, they felt the steady beating of their friends' hearts, and they gathered their quiet, everyday heroism for whatever the long afternoon would bring. There is a profound, beautiful mercy in the way the heavy, blinding sun eventually surrenders to the horizon, allowing the sky to soften into bruised purples and gentle, fading golds. As the long, exhausting afternoon of that first day finally began to wane, the landscape of the island shifted. The boys, their shoulders aching from the heavy canvas packs and their boots heavy with pale sand, moved slowly away from the open beaches and into the dense, towering heart of the island's sugarcane fields. Here, the world felt entirely different. The open expanse of the ocean was replaced by a thick, emerald forest of sweet-smelling stalks that reached high above their helmets, creating a sprawling, rustling canopy of green leaves. Walking through the cane was like wading through a quiet, hidden sea. The air grew still, losing the sharp bite of the salt spray, and took on the heavy, warm fragrance of crushed sugar, damp soil, and blooming tropical flowers. When the command was softly passed down the line to halt for the evening, a collective, silent sigh rippled through the tall grass. It was time to dig in for the night. In the fading amber light, the boys knelt in the dark, rich earth. They unhooked their small, folding shovels from their belts, and the quiet, rhythmic sound of metal scraping against soil began to echo softly through the fields. It was a humble, grounding task. After a day of surreal landscapes and overwhelming vastness, there was something deeply comforting about focusing on a space no larger than a dining room table. They dug slowly, methodically, feeling the earth grow cooler and more welcoming the deeper they went. They were carving out tiny, temporary homes in the soil, safe little hollows where they could finally rest their weary heads. Imagine two young friends, boys who had grown up on the same quiet street in a small, snowy town, now sharing one of these shallow depressions in the earth. Their knees are pulled to their chests, their shoulders touching. They are covered in a mixture of white coral dust and dark island mud, but in the soft, forgiving light of the twilight, they simply look like boys who have played too long in a summer field. They arrange their canvas packs to serve as pillows, patting the loose dirt to make it as soft as possible. There is a quiet intimacy in these moments, a profound, unspoken bond that requires no grand gestures. They are simply there for one another, anchoring each other to the earth. As the sun finally slips below the horizon, the sky puts on a breathtaking display of color. Brilliant streaks of coral pink, deep violet, and warm tangerine stretch across the clouds, casting a soft, painted glow over the endless miles of swaying sugarcane. For a few brief minutes, the boys simply sit and watch the sky. The beauty of it is almost startling. It reminds them that despite the heavy iron ships waiting off the coast, and despite the strange, heavy uniforms they wear, the world is still capable of immense, quiet grace. They watch the colors deepen and fade, breathing in the cooling air, feeling the frantic pounding of their hearts finally begin to slow to a steady, rhythmic beat. And then, the tropical night truly falls. It does not descend slowly like the long summer evenings back home. It drops like a heavy, velvet curtain. The darkness in the cane fields is absolute. Without the moon yet risen, the world narrows down to the few inches in front of their faces. And as the light vanishes, the island begins to sing. It is a chorus entirely unfamiliar to ears accustomed to the rumble of streetcars or the familiar rustle of oak trees. The tropical night hums with a vibrant, living energy. Millions of tiny tree frogs begin a high, rhythmic chirping that sounds like the gentle ringing of silver bells. Crickets weave a steady, vibrating drone beneath it. And high above them, the ocean breeze catches the tops of the tall sugarcane stalks. The long, stiff leaves rub against one another in the dark, creating a sound exactly like a soft, continuous rain, or the gentle, rhythmic shushing of a mother trying to quiet a restless child. Shoo, shoo. The island breathes, and the cane whispers back. In the pitch black of their small earthen hollow, the two friends sit shoulder to shoulder. The darkness makes the world feel incredibly small, bringing them closer together. One boy, his throat dry from the long march, silently reaches down to his hip and unscrews the small metal cap of his canteen. The tiny squeak of the metal thread sounds loud in the quiet night, but he moves carefully, deliberately. He takes a small, slow sip. The water is lukewarm, tasting faintly of aluminum and iodine, but to a parched throat, it is the sweetest nectar in the world. He does not put the cap back on. Instead, he gently nudges the elbow of his friend in the dark. He holds the heavy canteen out, his fingers brushing against his friend's knuckles as the cool metal is transferred from one hand to the other. "Here," he whispers, his voice barely a breath, softer than the rustling cane above them. "Take some." "Thanks," comes the whispered reply in the dark. It is a tiny, unremarkable exchange. But in the vast, terrifying darkness of an unfamiliar island, the sharing of a few drops of water is an act of profound love. It is a quiet promise made in the shadows: what I have is yours. We will look after each other. His friend drinks, careful not to spill a single drop, and passes it back. They sit in the comfortable, shared silence, listening to the silver bells of the tree frogs. In the next foxhole over, separated only by a few feet of earth and tangled roots, another young man is fighting a quiet battle against his own private fears. The darkness plays tricks on the mind, making every rustling leaf sound like approaching footsteps. He feels a cold knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. His breathing becomes shallow, his hands gripping the cold wood of his rifle stock so tightly that his fingers ache. He closes his eyes, trying to block out the unfamiliar, overwhelming reality of the tropical night. Slowly, his trembling hand leaves the rifle and slips inside his damp canvas jacket. His fingers find the small, square shape of a breast pocket, and inside it, the folded edge of a letter. He cannot read it in the dark. He doesn't need to. He knows the delicate, sloping handwriting by heart. It is a letter from his wife, written at their small kitchen table while their newborn son slept in a bassinet nearby. He traces the outline of the paper through the fabric of his shirt. He closes his eyes and focuses his mind entirely on that kitchen. He imagines the smell of coffee and warm bread. He imagines the soft yellow light of the overhead lamp, the way it catches the gold band on her left hand as she writes. He recites the words to himself, a silent, comforting mantra in the dark. The baby smiled today for the first time. The weather has finally turned warm. The garden is starting to sprout. We love you. We are waiting for you. With every word he remembers, the cold knot in his chest loosens just a little bit more. The unfamiliar sounds of the island fade into the background, replaced by the gentle, imagined sound of his wife's voice. He takes a deep, steadying breath, letting the scent of the sweet sugarcane fill his lungs. He is still afraid, but he is no longer empty. The simple piece of paper against his heart is a shield, a warm, glowing ember of home that keeps the chilling damp of the night at bay. He presses his hand firmly against his chest, holding his family close, and finally allows his tense muscles to relax into the soft earth. As the hours stretch on, a heavy, irresistible exhaustion settles over the cane fields. The adrenaline of the day has completely burned away, leaving behind bodies that crave nothing more than the sanctuary of sleep. But sleep in a foxhole is a fragile, fleeting thing. It comes in short, fragmented waves, constantly interrupted by the need to stay alert, to watch over the boy resting beside you. The two friends from the snowy town have found a way to share the burden of the night. They sit back to back, their spines pressed firmly together against the cool dirt wall of their hollow. Through their damp shirts, they can feel the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of each other's breathing. It is the most comforting sensation in the world. As long as he can feel the gentle pressure of his friend's back expanding with breath, he knows everything is all right. "You sleep," the first boy whispers into the dark, tilting his head back slightly to rest it against his friend's shoulder. "I'll keep watch for a while. Close your eyes." The friend doesn't argue. He is too tired. He simply nods in the dark, letting his heavy eyelids fall shut. "Wake me in a few hours," he murmurs, his voice already thick with sleep. "Don't stay up all night." "I won't," the first boy promises gently. "I've got you. Go to sleep." He sits there in the pitch black, his eyes wide open, acting as a quiet guardian. He watches the fireflies begin to dance among the stalks of the sugarcane, tiny, floating sparks of pale green light that drift lazily through the air. They remind him of catching lightning bugs in a glass jar on a muggy July evening. He watches them blink on and off, matching his slow breathing to their gentle, rhythmic pulsing. He feels the weight of his sleeping friend leaning against him, and he does not move an inch, perfectly content to be the anchor that allows his brother to drift into a peaceful slumber. This is the true heroism of the night. It is not found in grand, sweeping actions. It is found in these quiet, unseen moments. It is the boy who stays awake so his friend can dream. It is the boy who shares his last swallow of lukewarm water. It is the boy who finds the courage to face the dark by holding tightly to a creased piece of paper. In the vast, sprawling theater of the Pacific, beneath the towering, rustling leaves of the sugarcane, these young men build fortresses of kindness and resilience, protecting each other with a fierce, quiet love. High above the island, the clouds finally part, revealing the breathtaking majesty of the tropical night sky. Millions of stars spill across the velvet blackness, a glittering, icy river of light that stretches from horizon to horizon. They cast a faint, silvery glow over the fields, turning the tips of the sugarcane into a sea of pale, swaying ghosts. The moonlight touches the sleeping faces in the dirt, softening their tired features, washing away the dirt and the fear, leaving only the peaceful, innocent faces of youth. The island continues its rhythmic lullaby. The tree frogs chime, the crickets hum, and the wind gently shushes the long, green leaves. Shoo, shoo, sleep now, in the cool earth. Let the sweet scent of the cane cradle you. The night is long, but you are not alone. You are surrounded by brothers, by shared warmth, by whispered promises in the dark. Rest your heavy heads, hold your cherished memories close to your chest, and let the gentle breath of the Pacific night carry you safely through until the dawn. There is a kind of heat that does not just rest upon the skin, but settles deep into the very bones, heavy as iron and blinding as white fire. When the gentle, sheltering veil of the tropical night finally lifted, it was not replaced by a soft morning, but by a sudden, punishing brilliance. The sun did not simply rise over the island of Saipan, it seemed to conquer the sky, burning away the sweet, lingering mists of the cane fields in a matter of minutes. The air, which had been so cool and forgiving in the dark, quickly transformed into a thick, shimmering curtain of humidity. There was no ocean breeze to be found here in the dense interior of the island. The sky turned a pale, flawless, aching blue, devoid of even a single, wispy cloud that might have offered a moment of wandering shade. As the quiet order was given to move forward, the young men slowly rose from their shallow hollows in the earth. Their bodies were already stiff, their muscles protesting the heavy, damp weight of their thick, woolen blend uniforms, clothes designed for a world far away from this equatorial furnace. They hoisted their canvas packs onto their bruised shoulders, the heavy straps instantly digging into their collarbones. They fastened the canvas chin straps of their heavy steel helmets, which were already beginning to bake in the morning light, turning into small, stifling ovens atop their heads. The push inland began. It was not a charge. It was a slow, grueling, rhythmic trudge into the heart of the island. The soft dirt of the cane field soon gave way to jagged, uneven ridges of ancient, sun-bleached coral. The ground beneath their boots was sharp and unforgiving, crunching softly with every heavy, deliberate step. The dust that kicked up from the trail was a fine, chalky powder that coated their boots, their hands, and their damp faces, turning them all into pale, silent statues moving through a shimmering haze. In this sweltering, oppressive world, the vast machinery of the war completely faded away. There was no grand strategy in their minds, no thoughts of empires or distant generals. The entire universe narrowed down to the space of a few feet, the dusty heels of the boots belonging to the boy walking directly in front of them, the rhythmic, hypnotic sway of his canvas canteen, and the desperate, all-consuming need to simply take one more step. The sun became a physical weight, pressing down upon their shoulders, trying to force them to their knees. To survive this quiet agony, the boys retreated inward, finding sanctuary in the vast, beautiful landscapes of their own memories. Picture a young man from the high, windy plains of the Dakotas. He walks with his chin tucked down against his chest, the brim of his helmet casting a small, dark shadow over his eyes. Sweat stings his brow, sliding down the bridge of his nose to gather in the dust on his lips. But behind his closed eyes, he is not on this burning island. He is standing in the middle of a frozen, silent field in the dead of January. He vividly imagines the sharp, breathtaking bite of the winter wind against his cheeks. He pictures his breath pluming into the freezing air like thick white smoke. He remembers the sound of his boots crunching through a thick crust of pristine, glittering snow, and the profound, peaceful quiet of a world blanketed in white. He concentrates entirely on the memory of the cold. He imagines reaching out with a bare hand to break off an icicle hanging from his front porch, feeling the smooth, freezing wetness of it melting against his palm. He holds onto that imagined icicle with every ounce of his willpower, using the phantom chill to soothe his burning lungs, letting the memory of the snow pull his heavy legs forward, one agonizing step at a time. It is a brilliant, invisible act of everyday heroism, the quiet, stubborn refusal of the human mind to surrender to the suffering of the body. The column of men moves in a deep, profound silence. It takes too much energy to speak. The air is so thick it feels as though it must be pushed out of the way, and every breath is a conscious effort. Yet, within this silence, the bonds of brotherhood shine with a radiant, heartbreaking clarity. Up ahead, a boy stumbles. His foot catches on a jagged, hidden root of a twisted banyan tree, and his exhausted legs simply give way beneath him. He begins to fall, his heavy pack pulling him backward toward the sharp coral rock. But before he even hits the ground, two sets of hands are there. The boys walking beside him instinctively drop their own burdens, reaching out to grab his webbing, his arms, his shoulders. They catch him. They haul him back to his feet with a quiet, desperate strength. They do not shout, they do not scold. One of them, a tall boy with kind, tired eyes, simply wraps a steady arm around his friend's waist. "I've got you," he whispers, his voice raspy and dry. "Lean on me. I've got you." Without asking, the other boy reaches over and unclips the heavy bandolier of ammunition from the stumbling boy's chest, slinging it over his own already aching shoulder to lighten his friend's load. They adjust their pace, moving just a fraction slower, matching their rhythm to the boy who is struggling, building a protective, moving wall of human care around him. They carry his weight, because they know, with absolute certainty, that tomorrow he would do the exact same for them. As the sun climbs to its absolute zenith, sitting like a brilliant, glaring coin at the very top of the sky, the true torment of the march takes hold. Thirst. It is a profound, aching longing that settles into the back of the throat and refuses to leave. Water becomes more precious than gold, more beautiful than any gemstone. The canvas canteens hanging at their hips feel heartbreakingly ill-eyed. The water inside them has grown as warm as bath water, tasting heavily of aluminum and the bitter, metallic tang of iodine purification tablets. But to these boys, it is the sweetest, most vital nectar in existence. Listen to the quiet rustle of a boy unscrewing the small black cap of his canteen. His hands are trembling slightly. He raises it to his cracked lips and allows himself just a single, measured swallow. It coats his dry throat, offering a fleeting, agonizingly brief moment of relief. He lowers the canteen, staring at it for a moment, listening to the hollow slosh of the few ounces remaining inside. He looks over at the boy walking next to him. His friend's face is pale beneath the dirt, his lips cracked and bleeding, his eyes unfocused as he stares blankly at the ground ahead. The boy knows his friend's canteen has been empty since mid-morning. A quiet war is fought in the boy's heart. His own body is screaming for the rest of the water. Every instinct begs him to drink it, to hoard it against the fiery afternoon. But he looks at his friend, and the love he holds for his brother overpowers the desperate demands of his own flesh. He reaches out, gently tapping his friend's arm. The boy turns, his eyes hollow. Without a single word, the first boy holds out his open canteen. The friend stares at it, completely stunned by the magnitude of the offer. To give away water in this sweltering hell is to give away a piece of one's own life. No, the friend whispers, shaking his head slightly. You need it. Take a sip, the boy insists, pushing the warm metal gently against his friend's chest. Just wet your mouth. Go on. With a trembling hand, the friend takes the canteen. He raises it to his lips, his eyes fluttering shut as the warm, metallic water touches his tongue. He takes only a sip, forcing himself to stop, and hands it back with a look of gratitude so profound it requires no language. It is a small, quiet miracle of human kindness, blooming right there in the harsh, blinding dust of the trail. In the middle of the afternoon, the landscape finally offers a tiny shred of mercy. The column halts in the shadow of a massive, ancient limestone cliff, its jagged face draped in thick, green vines. The cliff casts a long, deep shadow over the coral path. The relief of stepping out of the direct sun and into the cool, dark shade is so overwhelming that several boys simply weep. They collapse into the dust, pulling off their heavy steel helmets, letting the cooler air touch their soaked, matted hair. They lean against the cool stone, their chests heaving as they try to catch their breath, pulling the shadowed air deep into their lungs. In this quiet sanctuary, a young man digs carefully into the breast pocket of his uniform. His hands are filthy, but he touches the small, folded square of paper with the utmost reverence. It is a letter from his older sister, received weeks ago, read so many times that the creases are soft and worn like old cloth. He unfolds it in the dim light. The boy sitting next to him leans over, resting his chin on his knees, eager for the distraction, eager for a connection to the world they left behind. What does she say? The friend whispers softly. The boy smiles, his eyes scanning the elegant, faded blue ink. She says it's been raining back home. A cool, steady rain for 3 days. She says the creek behind the house has risen, and the water is running cold and clear over the stones. The friend closes his eyes, letting out a soft, longing sigh. Keep reading. She says Mom made a pitcher of iced tea. The boy continues, his own voice growing incredibly gentle, hypnotized by the words. She said they left it in the icebox all afternoon. They sat on the front porch, listening to the rain, and the glass of tea was so cold it left a ring of water on the wooden table. They sit in the shadows, letting the beautiful, refreshing words wash over them. They can almost hear the soft drum of the rain on a tin roof. They can almost feel the condensation weeping down the sides of a cold glass, the sweet, icy chill of the tea against their parched throats. The letter is a magic spell, transporting them out of the tropical furnace and placing them gently onto a cool, shaded porch back home. They share the memory of the rain, passing it back and forth between them like a cherished gift, letting the simple, beautiful thoughts of home repair their exhausted spirits. As the afternoon finally begins to age, the angle of the light slowly shifts. The terrible, glaring white of the sky begins to soften into a pale, golden yellow. The shadows of the twisted trees begin to stretch long and cool across the coral rock. The worst of the day is breaking. The column rises again, their bodies still aching, their throats still dry, but their spirits buoyed by the subtle lifting of the heat. They move forward with a quiet, determined grace. They have survived the sun. They have carried each other through the fiery trial of the afternoon, bound together by shared water, by shared burdens, and by shared dreams of cool rain. The march is far from over, and the island still holds many mysteries in its dense, green heart. But as the evening breeze finally begins to stir, rustling the leaves and offering the first, sweet kiss of cool air against their faces, the young men walk with a quiet pride. They look at the boys walking beside them, their faces covered in the pale dust of the trail, and they know that as long as they hold on to one another, there is no burden too heavy to bear, and no sun too hot to endure. The sky above them softens, the blinding light fades, and the island gently exhales, welcoming them into the merciful, forgiving shadows of the twilight. There is a quiet weight to a mountain, a profound, heavy stillness that asks a silent question of every soul who stands at its base. Rising from the very center of the island, Mount Tapachao stood like an ancient, slumbering giant wrapped in a cloak of emerald green. It was not the tallest mountain in the world, but to the exhausted young men standing in the dusty plains below, its jagged limestone peaks seemed to pierce the very fabric of the sky. Its summit was often lost in a crown of soft, gray clouds, giving it an air of deep mystery. It was a looming, undeniable presence, a shadow that stretched across the island and settled quietly into the minds of everyone who knew they would soon have to climb it. The journey upward did not begin with a shout or a sudden rush. It began with a slow, collective exhale, a quiet resignation to the profound effort that lay ahead. The boys adjusted the heavy canvas straps of their packs, letting the weight settle onto bruised collarbones. They pulled their steel helmets down just a little lower to shield their eyes from the glare of the bright sky, and they took the first, heavy step onto the rising incline. Leaving the flat, dusty cane fields behind, the earth beneath their boots quickly transformed. The ground became a tangled labyrinth of ancient, sun-baked coral and the thick, grasping roots of ironwood trees. Every step required a conscious, deliberate effort. The coral was sharp, crumbling under the heavy soles of their boots, sliding backward in small, dusty cascades. The mountain seemed to be gently, persistently pushing them away, testing their resolve with every inch of elevation gained. As the angle of the climb grew steeper, a deep, rhythmic silence fell over the long column of men winding their way up the narrow trails. The energy required to speak was simply too precious to waste. The air grew thinner, the tropical humidity wrapping around them like a warm, heavy blanket. The only sounds were the steady, hypnotic crunch of boots on loose rock, the creak of damp leather, and the heavy, synchronized breathing of 100 young men moving as one continuous, exhausted lung. In this quiet, vertical world, the bond between the soldiers deepened into something incredibly profound. They were no longer walking beside each other, they were tethered together by an invisible, unbreakable thread of shared suffering and quiet love. When a young man's boot slipped on a patch of loose moss, sending him stumbling forward onto his knees, the boy behind him did not hesitate. A hand reached out instantly, grasping the thick webbing of the fallen boy's harness, hauling him back to his feet with a surge of quiet, desperate strength. "I've got you," the boy whispered, his voice dry and raspy, his hand remaining firmly on his friend's shoulder for a long moment. He did not ask if his friend was all right, he simply offered the anchor of his own exhausted body. The fallen boy nodded, taking a deep, shuddering breath, and they resumed their slow, rhythmic climb together. They were bound by an unspoken promise, a beautiful, everyday heroism that declared they would all reach the top, or none of them would. The mountain demanded a physical toll, but it also offered a strange, hypnotic clarity. As the sheer exertion stripped away all the complex, noisy anxieties of the wider world, the boys found their minds wandering back to the quiet, gentle memories of home. Picture a young man from the rolling, green foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. He climbs with a steady, measured pace, his body remembering the rhythm of childhood hikes through cool, shaded forests. As the sweat stings his eyes and the heavy pack pulls backward against his shoulders, he closes his eyes for just a moment and transports himself across the vast ocean. He imagines he is a boy again, walking a few steps behind his father on a crisp, golden autumn afternoon. He can vividly remember the smell of the dry pine needles crushing beneath his canvas sneakers. He remembers the sharp, clean bite of the November air in his lungs, so completely different from the suffocating humidity of this tropical peak. He hears his father's gentle, encouraging voice floating back to him over the rustling leaves. "Don't look at the top of the hill, son. Just look at the patch of dirt right in front of your toes. Take it one step at a time. The mountain isn't going anywhere." The young man holds onto that memory like a precious, glowing ember. He lowers his chin, fixing his gaze completely on the heels of the boy walking directly in front of him. He lets the imagined voice of his father guide his rhythm. One step. Then another. He uses the beautiful, cool memory of home to soothe his burning muscles, transforming the terrifying, jagged cliffs of Saipan into the gentle, familiar slopes of his childhood. Midway through the afternoon, the column halted on a narrow, limestone ledge to catch their breath. The air here was slightly cooler, kissed by a gentle breeze that had finally managed to break through the dense canopy of the trees. The boys sank down against the rock wall, pulling the heavy steel helmets from their aching heads, letting the wind cool their damp hair. Below them, the island stretched out in a breathtaking patchwork of emerald greens and deep, shadowed valleys, bordered by the endless, sparkling expanse of the blue Pacific. It was a view of stunning, terrible beauty. But the boys did not look out at the horizon. They looked at each other. A young medic, his uniform stained with the red clay of the lower trails, moved quietly down the line of resting men. He carried a small, battered metal tin. Inside were hard, lemon-flavored candies, sent in a care package months ago and saved for a moment exactly like this. He stopped in front of a boy who was leaning heavily against the cool stone, his eyes closed, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The medic gently tapped the boy's knee. When the boy opened his tired eyes, the medic held out a single, yellow candy in his dusty palm. It was a tiny, insignificant object, but in the harsh reality of the climb, it was an offering of immense luxury and profound kindness. The boy took it slowly, his fingers brushing against the medic's hand. As the sweet, tart flavor bloomed on his dry tongue, a small, genuine smile broke through the mask of dust and fatigue on his face. It was a taste of home, a brief, beautiful reminder of a world that was sweet and gentle. The medic nodded softly, offering a quiet smile in return, before moving on to the next exhausted boy, dispensing tiny drops of comfort on the side of a mountain. Further down the ledge, another young man used a brief pause to reach into the breast pocket of his shirt. He pulled out a small, waterproof pouch. Inside was not a letter, but a delicate, pressed flower. It was a bluebonnet, its color slightly faded, picked by his younger sister from the fields behind their house in Texas and slipped into his last letter. He held it carefully between his rough, calloused fingers, marveling at how something so incredibly fragile had survived the journey across an ocean, the chaotic landing on the beaches, and the grueling push through the cane fields. He stared at the delicate, papery petals, feeling a sudden, overwhelming wave of tenderness. He realized that this is why he was climbing. He was not climbing for the sake of conquering a map, or for the glory of an empire. He was climbing so that delicate things could continue to bloom in the world. He was climbing so his sister could run through a field of bluebonnets without looking up at the sky in fear. He carefully slipped the flower back into its pouch, placing it over his heart, drawing an immeasurable strength from the fragile beauty it held. When the quiet word was given to move again, the boys rose with a renewed, solemn grace. The afternoon was beginning to age, the brilliant sunlight softening into a hazy, golden slant that painted the jagged rocks in warm, forgiving colors. As they pushed higher, approaching the upper reaches of the mountain, the weather began to change. The soft, gray clouds that constantly crowned the peak descended, wrapping the column in a cool, damp mist. The vast view of the island disappeared, replaced by a soft, white fog that isolated them from the rest of the world. In the mist, the mountain lost its intimidating scale. The world narrowed down to the immediate, intimate circle of the men around them. They moved like ghosts through the clouds, their uniforms turning dark with the condensing moisture. The cool mist was a profound relief to their sun-baked skin. It felt like a gentle hand wiping away the sweat and the dust of the lower trails. The silence in the clouds was absolute, a heavy, muffled quiet that felt like being wrapped in cotton. In this isolated, suspended space, the unspoken duty to one another became the only thing that mattered. When a boy's legs finally began to tremble with total exhaustion, the friend beside him reached over and silently took his rifle, carrying the extra weight without a single word of complaint. They navigated the treacherous, wet rocks by watching the placement of each other's feet, stepping exactly where it was safe, guiding their brothers through the fog. They were no longer individuals. They were a single, living entity, bound by trust, by shared water, by the quiet sharing of a piece of candy, and by the heavy, beautiful weight of carrying each other's fears. The mountain tried to break them with its jagged paths and its suffocating heat, but it could not pierce the invisible armor of their brotherhood. As the evening finally began to fall, turning the white mist into a deep, bruised purple, the column reached a wide, flat plateau near the summit. The climbing was over for the day. They had not conquered the entire mountain, but they had conquered the day, and they had done it together. They collapsed onto the damp earth, too tired to even remove their packs. The air up here was cool, smelling deeply of crushed ferns, wet stone, and the clean, sweet scent of the clouds. They lay on their backs, staring up at the darkening mist, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of their own breathing finally slowing down to a calm, steady pace. The boys huddled close together for warmth in the cooling air. A hand reached out in the dark, finding a shoulder, giving it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. A soft whisper traveled through the fog. "We made it. Rest now." Mount Tapachau still loomed over the island, its peak hidden in the night sky. But to the boys resting on its rocky shoulder, it no longer felt like a menacing giant. It was simply the earth holding them up. They closed their eyes, wrapping themselves in the cool mist and the comforting warmth of the men beside them. They dreamed of rolling green hills, of bluebonnets, and of fathers walking ahead on autumn trails. The mountain cast no shadow in the dark, and in the profound, peaceful quiet of the heights, the weary young men finally surrendered to a deep, beautiful, and hard-earned slumber. There is a specific kind of silence that does not mean peace, but rather a breath held entirely too long. When the young men slowly descended from the misty, comforting heights of the mountain and stepped into the long, narrow corridor below, the world seemed to instantly lose its voice. This place would come to be known in the histories by a harsh and terrifying name, but to the boys who walked its shadowed floor, it was simply the Valley of Whispers. It was a deep, sunken scar in the earth, walled in on both sides by towering, jagged cliffs of gray limestone and choked with a thick, tangled canopy of vines and ancient banyan trees. The walls of the valley were so high, and the foliage so incredibly dense, that the ocean breeze could not reach them here. The air was entirely still, heavy with the humid, sweet scent of rotting mangoes and damp moss, hanging over the floor like an invisible, suffocating blanket. In this sunken world, the bright, blinding sun of the Pacific was filtered through thousands of broad, green leaves, turning the light into a soft, bruised, aquatic green. It felt like walking along the bottom of a quiet, forgotten sea. Every sound was magnified in the stillness. The snap of a dry twig beneath a canvas boot, the rattle of a metal canteen against a webbed belt, the sudden, sharp intake of a frightened breath, these small noises bounced off the limestone walls and echoed endlessly, sounding like thunder in the hushed, expectant air. Because of this profound, eerie stillness, the boy stopped speaking aloud. The valley demanded reverence, or perhaps, it demanded caution. When they needed to communicate, they leaned in close, their shoulders touching, and spoke in the softest, gentlest whispers. The entire corridor was filled with the soft, murmuring rustle of their hushed voices, weaving together with the gentle hum of the tropical insects, creating a continuous, soothing hum that floated through the shadows. Courage in this valley was not found in grand, sweeping charges across open fields. It was not found in the roaring machinery of war, or the cinematic bravery of a silver screen. Courage here was a quiet, agonizing exercise in patience. It was the simple, terrifying act of waiting. For hours on end, the men would crouch behind the fallen, moss-covered trunks of massive trees, or press themselves flat against the damp, cool faces of the limestone boulders. The enemy was out there, hidden perfectly within the deep caves and the dense brush of the cliff walls, completely invisible to the naked eye. The tension was a physical weight, a tight, cold knot resting heavily in the center of their chests. Their young, exhausted eyes would strain against the shifting shadows, watching the ferns sway gently in the stillness, wondering if the movement was just a trick of the dappled light, or something deeply perilous waiting just a few feet away. Look closely at a boy hiding in the tangled roots of a breadfruit tree. His face is smeared with dark earth to blend into the shadows. His hands, gripping the warm wood of his rifle, are completely white at the knuckles. He has been sitting perfectly still for 3 hours. The muscles in his legs are screaming with cramps, his throat is entirely parched, and his mind is beginning to fray from the sheer, overwhelming effort of remaining hypervigilant in the quiet. Suddenly, a tiny splash of brilliant, iridescent color drifts down from the green canopy above. It is a butterfly, its wings a breathtaking shade of electric blue, bordered in velvet black. It flutters aimlessly, caught in a stray beam of golden sunlight, entirely unbothered by the heavy anxiety that saturates the ground below. The boy watches it, mesmerized. The butterfly dances through the air and then, with a delicate, impossible grace, lands gently on the very tip of the boy's rusted, mud-caked rifle barrel. For a long, beautiful moment, the boy stops breathing. He does not want to frighten the creature away. He stares at the fragile, pulsing wings, marveling at the intricate, perfect patterns of nature. In the midst of this terrifying valley, in the shadow of the cliffs, here is a tiny, undeniable piece of grace. It is a reminder that the world is still capable of immense, delicate beauty. The boy feels the cold knot in his chest loosen just a fraction. He watches the butterfly open and close its wings, absorbing its quiet peace, letting the soft blue color wash over his tired mind. When the butterfly finally lifts back into the air and disappears into the canopy, the boy lets out a long, slow, trembling exhale. He is still afraid, but his spirit has been gently touched, grounded once again by the simple, enduring beauty of the island. Further down the line, huddled together behind a crumbling wall of white coral, two friends are fighting their own quiet battle against the suffocating silence. The older of the two, a boy from the crowded, bustling neighborhoods of Chicago, can see that his friend is beginning to unravel. The younger boy is trembling, his knees pulled tight to his chest, his eyes squeezed shut as he tries to block out the overwhelming, silent threat of the valley. The older boy knows that panic is a thief that steals the breath and the mind. He shifts closer, pressing his arm firmly against his friend's side, offering the steady, undeniable warmth of his own body. He leans his head in, his lips just inches from his friend's ear, and begins to whisper. He does not whisper about the valley, or the shadows, or the long afternoon ahead. He whispers about a bakery on the corner of his street back home. "You should smell this place on a Sunday morning," he murmurs softly, his voice a rhythmic, hypnotic lullaby. Before the sun even comes up, Mr. Rossi is in there, baking. You walk by the glass window, and the street smells like melted butter and warm vanilla. It's so thick you can almost taste it. The younger boy's trembling begins to slow. He keeps his eyes closed, but he tilts his head slightly toward the voice, clinging to the words like a lifeline. "He makes these pastries," the older boy continues, his whisper smooth and calming. "Filled with sweet ricotta and dusted with powdered sugar. When you bite into them, the pastry shatters, and the sugar gets all over your fingers and your nose. My mother would give me a nickel, just one shiny nickel, and I would run down the block. The bells on the glass door would chime when you walked in." In the deep, terrifying silence of the valley, the older boy builds a sanctuary out of whispered words. He paints a picture so incredibly vivid, so deeply infused with love and nostalgia, that the gray walls of the valley simply fade away. For 10 beautiful minutes, they are not soldiers trapped in a jungle corridor. They are just two boys sitting on a sunny sidewalk in Illinois, smelling fresh bread and brushing powdered sugar from their chins. The younger boy's breathing deepens, matching the slow, steady rhythm of his friend's story. The older boy keeps whispering, pouring all of his care and his strength into the soft syllables, wrapping his brother in a protective blanket of memory, keeping the shadows safely at bay. The afternoon stretches on, the heat in the valley growing thicker, pressing down like a physical weight. The waiting is an agony of its own. It is the agonizing space between the lightning and the thunder, stretched out over endless hours. During a brief pause in the hushed vigilance, a young medic sitting in the hollow of a dry riverbed reaches carefully into his damp pack. His hands are stained with the red clay of the mountain, but he treats the object he pulls out as if it were spun from glass. It is a small, slightly crushed box, wrapped in brown paper that has been softened by the humidity of the ocean voyage. He pries the lid off with infinite care. Inside, nestled on a bed of crumpled newspaper, are a dozen homemade cookies. They are stale now, the edges crumbled into fine dust, the chocolate faded and bloomed with white. But as he lifts one to his nose and breathes in, the faint, lingering scent of brown sugar and oats fills his senses. His mother had baked them, packing them into the box on a cold evening in Ohio, completely unaware of where they would ultimately be opened. He does not eat them right away. He looks at the boys resting near him in the ditch. Their faces are drawn, their eyes hollow with exhaustion, their lips cracked from the dry, stale water in their canteens. Without a single word, the medic gently breaks the stale cookie into 4 small pieces. He crawls softly through the dirt, handing a fragment to each of the boys. They take the offering with trembling hands. As they place the sweet crumbs on their tongues, you can see the profound shift in their eyes. It is the taste of home. It is the taste of a mother's kitchen, of safety, of a world that is soft and forgiving. In the shadows of the valley, that small, crumbling piece of sweetness is an absolute miracle. They chew slowly, savoring every single grain of sugar, letting the familiar taste remind them of who they are beneath the dirt and the fear. They look at the medic, offering quiet, tearful nods of gratitude. It is a beautiful communion in the wilderness, a quiet sharing of love that sustains their weary bodies far more than any ration ever could. As the light in the valley finally begins to fail, the thick green canopy above turns to a deep, impenetrable black. The darkness here is not like the darkness of the open cane fields. It is absolute, heavy, and immediate. The temperature drops, bringing a sudden, damp chill that seeps right through their damp canvas uniforms. The brothers in arms prepare for the long night ahead. They cannot build fires, they cannot use flashlights. They must survive the night on the warmth of each other's presence. They pair off, sliding down into the shallow mud of the valley floor, pressing their backs tightly together to share their body heat. "I'll take the first watch," a boy whispers into the dark, pulling his knees up to his chest. "You get some sleep. I'll wake you when the moon crosses the ridge." His friend simply nods in the blackness, too exhausted to argue. He leans his heavy head against his brother's shoulder, closing his eyes. "Thank you," he breathes softly. "Don't let the fireflies spook you." "I won't," the first boy promises, a gentle, weary smile touching his lips. He sits there in the absolute dark, his eyes straining against the shadows, his ears listening past the hum of the cicadas for any unnatural sound. He is terrified. Every instinct in his body screams for him to run, to escape the suffocating walls of the valley. But he feels the weight of his sleeping friend leaning against him. He feels the slow, trusting rhythm of his friend's breathing. And in that quiet, vulnerable trust, he finds a well of incredible, everyday heroism. He will not run. He will sit in the dark, he will face the shadows, and he will keep watch. The Valley of Whispers holds many terrors, but it cannot break the profound, familial love that binds these young men together. In the endless hours of waiting, in the terrifying silence, they become each other's anchors. They are sustained by shared memories, by the taste of stale cookies, and by the gentle, whispered promises made in the dark. They are just boys, far from home, but in the deepest, most shadowed corners of the earth, their quiet resilience shines with a brilliant, undeniable light. Sleep now, in the cool damp of the earth. The valley is dark, but you are watched over. Your brothers are awake, and their love is a shield that the shadows can never pierce. There is a profound, beautiful mercy in the rain, a gentle power that can wash away the present and replace it, if only for an hour, with the soothing echoes of the past. Before the first drop even fell, the island seemed to let out a long, collective sigh. The oppressive, blinding heat that had baked the coral trails all morning began to soften, lifting away as a great canopy of bruised, slate-gray clouds rolled slowly over the jagged peaks of the mountains. The brilliant, glaring sky surrendered to a deep, twilight dimness, even in the middle of the afternoon. A sudden, cool breeze swept through the tall cane fields and the dense, tangled valleys, rustling the broad, waxy leaves of the breadfruit trees with a sound like 1,000 hushed voices whispering a warning. And then, the tropical rain began to fall. It did not start as a gentle drizzle, but as a sudden, heavy, and magnificent downpour. The drops were enormous, warm and heavy, falling in a dense, shimmering curtain of silver that instantly blurred the edges of the world. The sheer volume of the water completely drowned out every other sound on the island. The chaotic, terrifying noises of the world beyond the trees were swallowed whole by the deep, rhythmic, rushing roar of the monsoon. It was a deafening, encompassing sound, yet it was not frightening. It was a white noise of pure, absolute peace, an acoustic blanket wrapped tightly around the shoulders of every exhausted young man resting in the mud. With practiced, hurried movements, the boys reached into their heavy canvas packs and pulled out their stiff, olive-green ponchos. They threw the rubberized canvas over their heads, pulling their knees to their chests, sinking down against the roots of the ancient banyan trees or the crumbling walls of the limestone cliffs. In an instant, the vast, terrifying theater of the Pacific was reduced to a space no larger than a few square feet. Beneath the dark green hoods, the boys found a sudden, profound sanctuary. They were entirely isolated in their own small, private tents, shielded from the eyes of the world, hidden away in a damp, shadowy cocoon. The rain drummed a heavy, steady, hypnotic rhythm against the thick rubber of the ponchos. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It sounded exactly like the rain pounding against the tin roof of a barn back in Ohio, or the rhythmic tapping against a bedroom window in a quiet suburb of Boston. As the ground drank in the heavy deluge, a deeply familiar, intoxicating scent rose from the earth. It was petrichor, the sweet, rich, dusty perfume of dry soil meeting rain. For these young men, thousands of miles from the lives they knew, that smell was an instant, invisible bridge to their childhoods. It smelled of splashing in mud puddles on a Tuesday afternoon. It smelled of spring storms washing the winter salt from the streets. It smelled of home. In this beautiful, suspended pause, as the island drank the rain, a quiet ritual began beneath the green canvas hoods. Hands that were calloused, stained with red clay, and shaking with residual adrenaline reached carefully inside damp wool shirts. They unbuttoned breast pockets with infinite tenderness, fingers searching for the most valuable possessions they carried. Not rations. Not ammunition. But fragile, folded squares of paper. Picture a young man from a small, dusty farming town in the heart of the Midwest. He sits cross-legged beneath his poncho, his rifle resting forgotten across his lap. His hands cup a small, worn envelope. The edges are soft, frayed like old cotton from being touched, folded, and unfolded 100 times over. He slides the letter out. The paper is slightly damp from the humidity, the elegant, sloping blue ink blooming and blurring in tiny spots where sweat or a stray raindrop has touched it. He doesn't just read the words, he absorbs them. It is a letter from his mother. She writes about the garden behind the kitchen. She tells him that the tomatoes are finally coming in heavy and red on the vine, and that the old golden retriever has taken to sleeping in the shade beneath the porch stairs, waiting for the mail carrier. She writes about sweeping the kitchen floor, about the neighbors asking after him at church, about the jar of peach preserve she is saving for the day he walks back through the front door. To anyone else, it is an entirely mundane collection of sentences. But to the boy shivering slightly in the tropical rain, it is a sacred text. He traces the loops of his mother's handwriting with a dirty thumbnail. He can almost hear the soft, familiar cadence of her voice speaking the words. He can see the faded floral pattern of her apron. He can smell the yeast of baking bread. He can feel the absolute, unconditional safety of her kitchen. He closes his eyes, letting the heavy drumming of the rain fade into the background, fully immersing himself in the beautiful, ordinary peace of that house. He holds the letter against his cheek, letting the smooth paper rest against his skin, drawing a deep, sustaining warmth from a love that spans an ocean. A few feet away, beneath another dark green canopy, two friends sit shoulder to shoulder, sharing the shelter of a single poncho to keep warm. The air between them is thick with the smell of wet wool and damp leather. One of the boys holds a letter of a different kind. It is written on pale pink stationery, the folds completely worn through in the center so that he has to hold it delicately, like a fragile butterfly. He does not read it aloud. He simply holds it up to his nose, closing his eyes and taking a slow, deep breath. "Can you still smell it?" his friend whispers softly over the sound of the rain, leaning his head back against the trunk of a tree. "Just barely," the boy whispers back, a sad, beautiful smile touching his lips. "If I close my eyes, I can just catch it." Lily of the Valley. It is the faint, phantom trace of his sweetheart's perfume, pressed into the paper months ago in a quiet parlor halfway across the world. He opens his eyes and looks at the faded, smudged lipstick kiss at the bottom of the page. He turns to his friend, his voice barely audible above the storm. "We were at the county fair. It was a warm night, like this, but without the rain. We rode the Ferris wheel, and when we stopped at the very top, you could see the lights of the whole town spread out below us. She was wearing a yellow dress. She looked like a movie star." His friend nods slowly, smiling in the dim light of the poncho. "She sounds beautiful. You're gonna take her back to that fair when we get home, right?" "First thing," the boy promises softly, carefully folding the pink paper along its fragile creases. "First thing I do." They sit in silence, the memory of the yellow dress and the lily of the valley filling the small, dark space beneath the canvas. The letter is a tether holding his heart securely to a girl waiting on a front porch, a promise that there is a soft, sweet world waiting for him to return. Not all the letters beneath the ponchos were being read. Some were being written. In a shallow depression in the mud, a young soldier balances his heavy steel helmet upside down across his knees, using the smooth interior as a makeshift writing desk. He holds a short, stubby wooden pencil, the lead dull and blunt. He is using a piece of paper torn from a small, waterlogged notebook. He leans forward, his chest pressed almost to his knees to ensure not a single stray drop of rain falls onto the page. He pauses, the tip of the pencil hovering above the paper. He has so much he wants to say. He wants to tell them about the terrifying, surreal beauty of the coral beaches. He wants to tell them about the suffocating heat of the cane fields and the deep, haunting shadows of the valleys. He wants to tell them how incredibly tired his bones feel and how much he just wants to sleep in his own bed with cool, clean sheets. But he stops. He thinks of his father, sitting in his armchair by the radio, rubbing his tired eyes. He thinks of his mother, jumping at the sound of the doorbell. He loves them far too much to burden them with the truth of his fear. So, he lowers the pencil, and he writes a beautiful, protective lie. "Dear folks," he writes, his handwriting cramped and shaky in the dim light. "I am doing just fine. We are resting today because it is raining. You wouldn't believe the rain here. It comes down in sheets, so warm you could take a bath in it. The island is very green, lots of strange trees and big flowers. Don't you worry about me, I am keeping my feet dry and staying out of trouble. The food is good, and the boys in my unit are looking out for me. I miss you all very much. Tell Billy he better not be riding my bicycle while I'm gone." He signs his name, his hand lingering on the final loop of the letter. He knows this piece of paper might not leave the island for weeks. It is an unsent letter, a quiet conversation with ghosts, a message cast out into the void in the hope that it will eventually find its way to a mailbox on a quiet suburban street. He reads it over, satisfied that it contains nothing but comfort. He folds it into a tiny square, wraps it in a piece of dry wax paper from a ration tin, and tucks it deep into the safest, driest pocket he has, right against his ribs. The rain on Saipan does not just water the earth, it waters the soul. In this gentle, suspended pause in the fighting, the boys are allowed to be sons, brothers, and lovers again. The letters are their ultimate armor. They are not made of steel or iron, but of something infinitely stronger. They are made of memory. They are made of devotion. They are physical proof that these young men are loved, that they are missed, and that their lives possess a profound, irreplaceable value. As they read the faded ink, they draw invisible strength from the people who wrote the words. The mother's quiet reassurance becomes the son's courage. The sweetheart's perfumed promise becomes the soldier's resilience. In the dark, wet isolation of the tropical storm, they pass the letters between their hands like sacred relics, holding onto the paper as tightly as they would hold onto a lifeline in a turbulent sea. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the drumming on the rubber ponchos begins to change. The heavy, rushing roar of the downpour softens into a steady, rhythmic patter. The deluge is ending. The sky above the canopy begins to lighten, shifting from a bruised gray to a pale, milky white. The leaves of the banyan trees drip heavily, shedding the last of the storm, returning the island to its quiet, humid stillness. Beneath the green canvas, the boys know the pause is over. With slow, reverent movements, they fold their letters one last time. They slide them back into the worn envelopes, back into the waterproof pouches, back into the breast pockets of their damp wool shirts. They press their hands against their chests, feeling the comforting, solid square of paper resting securely over their hearts. They throw back the hoods of the ponchos, emerging into the dripping, fragrant air of the jungle. The world is exactly as they left it, muddy, tangled, and filled with quiet danger. But the boys are different. They have been replenished. The cold knot of fear in their chests has been melted away by the warmth of a handwritten word. They pack their gear, the smell of the wet earth clinging to their uniforms, and look quietly at the brothers beside them. They do not need to speak of the tears that mixed with the rain, or the soft sighs exhaled beneath the canvas. They simply nod, adjust their heavy straps, and step forward into the damp green shadows, carrying the gentle, beautiful weight of home with them into whatever the evening may bring. There is a gentle, bruised color that paints the sky just before the night falls, a quiet shade of violet that seems to hold the very breath of the world. As the long, arduous afternoon slowly melted away, the young men found themselves emerging from the dense, tangled shadows of the valley, only to face the rising face of a new incline. It was a steep, jagged spine of ancient coral and limestone, pushing upward into the cooling air. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, it cast long, sweeping shadows across the rock, turning the pale gray stone into a soft, glowing lavender. It was a beautiful, melancholic light, a twilight that felt both sacred and incredibly heavy. This place would come to be remembered by a name that carried the profound, sorrowful weight of what happened here. It would be called Purple Heart Ridge. But in this quiet, fading hour, to the exhausted boys slowly making their way up its slopes, it was simply another hill to climb, wrapped in the gentle, forgiving colors of the evening. The ascent was painstakingly slow. The men did not march, they waded through the heavy air, their boots slipping on the loose, chalky rocks. The adrenaline that had carried them through the chaotic days behind them had entirely evaporated, leaving only a deep, aching weariness that settled into the very marrow of their bones. They moved with a quiet, solemn grace, their heads bowed, their shoulders slumped under the weight of their canvas packs. They looked like a procession of tired pilgrims, climbing toward the stars in search of a quiet place to finally rest. The ridge demanded a heavy toll from these young, weary travelers. Along the narrow, winding paths, boys who could simply climb no further sat gently against the cool face of the boulders. They were the wounded, the entirely exhausted, those whose bodies had finally surrendered to the impossible demands of the island. But they were not abandoned in the twilight. Moving quietly among the resting figures were the medics. If there are angels on this earth, they do not always wear white robes. Sometimes, they wear dusty canvas uniforms, their hands stained with the red clay of the earth, carrying nothing but small, battered pouches of mercy. The medics on the ridge moved with a tireless, beautiful devotion. They knelt in the sharp coral dust, completely ignoring their own overwhelming exhaustion, to offer the most profound comfort one human being can give to another. Imagine a young medic, barely 20 years old, his own face pale and drawn. He stops beside a boy resting heavily against the roots of a twisted ironwood tree. The boy's breathing is shallow, his eyes wide and unfocused, staring up at the darkening violet sky. The medic does not speak right away. He simply drops to his knees, taking off his heavy steel helmet, and reaches out to place a warm, steady hand on the boy's trembling shoulder. "I'm right here," the medic whispers, his voice softer than the rustling leaves above them. "You're doing just fine. Just rest now." The medic opens his canvas pouch. He takes a clean, white cloth, unscrews his own canteen, and dampens the fabric with his precious, remaining water. With movements so tender they break the heart to witness, he gently washes the pale dust and the sweat from the boy's forehead. He wipes away the grime from his cheeks, revealing the soft, innocent face of a youth who should be sitting on a front porch on a summer evening, not resting on a rocky cliff across the ocean. The cool water on the boy's skin is a profound relief. He closes his eyes, leaning his head back into the medic's supporting hand. The medic reaches into his kit for a tiny, fragile glass syringe. He administers it with a gentle, whispered apology for the small pinch. It is a tiny vessel of peace, a quiet magic that slowly pushes the pain away, replacing it with a heavy, floating warmth. As the medicine begins to work, the medic does not leave. He sits in the dust, taking the boy's cold hand between his own warm palms, rubbing the knuckles gently. He leans in close, asking the boy where he is from. "Maine," the boy whispers, his voice thick and sleepy. "Near the water." "That sounds beautiful," the medic murmurs, keeping his voice entirely steady, completely focused on building a safe, quiet room of words around them. "Tell me about the water. Is it cold?" "So cold," the boy smiles faintly, his eyes remaining closed. "The wind smells like pine trees and salt. In the morning, the fog rolls right up to the back door." "I can almost smell it," the medic replies softly. "You just think about that fog. You think about that cold water. I'll sit right here with you until you fall asleep. And he does. The medic sits on the jagged rocks, holding the boy's hand, humming a quiet, nameless tune, acting as an anchor while the boy slowly drifts away from the pain of the island and sails gently into the comforting, misty shores of his memory. It is a moment of pure, everyday heroism, the beautiful, selfless act of bearing witness to another's suffering and wrapping it in absolute love. Further up the slope, as the purple light deepened into a rich, starry indigo, another quiet farewell was taking place. Two friends, boys who had played in the same dusty neighborhood streets and ridden the same yellow school bus, were sitting together on a narrow ledge overlooking the dark expanse of the Pacific. One of the boys was leaning heavily against his friend's chest, his breathing slowing, growing incredibly quiet. The journey was ending for him here, on this high, lonely ridge. But there was no panic in the air, no grand, dramatic sorrow. There was only a profound, intimate peace. The friend holding him did not cry out. He knew that tears would only frighten his brother. Instead, he wrapped his arms tightly around the boy, pulling him close, resting his chin gently on the top of his friend's head. He rocked him, ever so slightly, side to side, a slow, maternal rhythm that matched the gentle sway of the ocean far below. "Do you remember the treehouse we built?" the friend whispered into the darkening air. "The one in the big oak out behind your father's garage?" The boy in his arms gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "We used those old, rusty nails," the friend continued, his voice a soft, melodic hum. "And that tarp that smelled like motor oil. We sat up there all summer. We thought we were the kings of the whole world, didn't we?" "We were," the boy breathed, a fragile smile touching his lips. "We're gonna go back there," the friend promised, his voice trembling just a fraction before he caught it, smoothing it out into a warm, reassuring blanket. "You just go on ahead. You go climb up into that oak tree, and you wait for me. I'll bring the comic books. Just like we always did." The boy's breathing grew even softer, matching the rustle of the evening wind. He lifted a heavy, tired hand, and his friend caught it instantly, pressing the palm against his own cheek. "Leave the porch light on for me," the boy whispered, the words fading into the cool night air. "I will," the friend replied, tears finally slipping silently down his face, dropping onto the boy's dusty uniform. "I promise. I'll leave it on." With a final, gentle sigh, the boy closed his eyes, and his quiet journey was over. He did not pass away in the chaos of war. He slipped away in the arms of his best friend, wrapped in the memory of a summer treehouse, cradled by a love so deep and profound that it transcended the jagged rocks and the darkening sky. The friend sat there for a long time, holding his brother in the purple twilight. With slow, reverent movements, he reached into the breast pocket of the boy's shirt. He carefully withdrew a small, folded letter and a silver pocket watch. He held them tightly in his hand, pressing them over his own heart. He would carry these treasures home. He would stand on a porch in an unfamiliar town, hand them to a weeping mother, and tell her that her son was brave, that he was not alone, and that he had gone to sleep thinking of her. This was the true, heartbreaking sacrifice of the ridge. It was not a sacrifice of numbers or territory. It was the sacrifice of youth. These were boys who would never grow old. They would never experience the quiet joys of seeing their own children learn to walk, or the peaceful contentment of sitting by a fire with silver hair. Their lives were frozen here, in the violet light of their 19th year. But as the night finally settled completely over the island, bringing a blanket of millions of glittering stars, a strange, beautiful comfort blanketed the slopes. The mountain did not reject these boys, it took them in. It cradled them in its ancient, rocky arms. The surviving soldiers, entirely exhausted, gathered along the edges of the trail. They took their rubber ponchos and their wool blankets, and with infinite, touching care, they laid them gently over the faces of the fallen. They tucked the edges in, exactly as a parent tucks a blanket around a sleeping child, making sure they were safe and warm against the cool night breeze. They sat together in the dark, leaning against the cool limestone. The terrifying noises of the world had completely faded away, replaced by the soft, rhythmic hum of the island's nocturnal chorus. The tree frogs chimed, the crickets sang, and the wind whispered through the twisted roots of the banyan trees. They looked up at the stars, feeling the immense, crushing sorrow of the day, but also a profound, unbreakable pride. They had carried each other. They had shared their last drops of water, they had washed away the dust from tired faces, and they had whispered stories of home into the dark to keep the fear away. The purple hard ridge was silent now. The twilight had passed, leaving behind a night that was perfectly still and deeply peaceful. Sleep now, young men. Your long, exhausting climb is over. The stars are watching over you, and the friends who sit beside you in the dark will carry your memory forever. You are wrapped in the quiet, enduring love of your brothers, safely resting on the high, gentle shoulder of the world. There is a profound, leveling humility in the rain, a way the heavy, weeping sky can soften the earth until it simply forgets how to be solid. When the true monsoon finally broke over the island of Saipan, it did not arrive with the gentle, passing grace of a summer shower. It came as a vast, gray ocean falling from the heavens, a relentless, drumming deluge that completely erased the horizon and turned the world into a blur of silver water. For days, the sun was only a memory, hidden behind thick, bruised clouds that seemed to scrape the very tops of the dark green mountains. The tropical air lost its suffocating heat and was replaced by a deep, bone-aching chill, a dampness that crept through the heavy canvas uniforms and settled quietly into the exhausted joints of the young men. The island itself began to change. The dry, white coral trails and the dusty paths through the cane fields drank the rain until they could hold no more, and then they transformed. The earth became a thick, churning sea of red mud. It was not ordinary mud, it was a heavy, clay-like paste that clung to everything it touched. With every single step, a boy's heavy leather boot would sink deep into the muck, and the earth would grab hold, requiring a slow, agonizing pull just to break the suction and lift the foot again. To walk in this world was to wage a quiet, exhausting battle against gravity itself. The men moved like slow, weary ghosts through the silver downpour, their heads bowed, the water cascading off the rims of their steel helmets in continuous, shimmering sheets. Their canvas packs, already burdened with the heavy necessities of survival, soaked up the water like sponges, doubling in weight, pulling their aching shoulders down toward the muddy earth. In these miserable, gray conditions, the vast machinery of empires and the grand strategies of generals completely dissolved, washed away by the sheer, overwhelming power of the monsoon. The fighting slowly sputtered into a heavy, waterlogged silence. You cannot march in a river of mud. You cannot look for shadows when the entire world is cast in a deep, rainy twilight. The only thing that mattered, the only thought that occupied the minds of thousands of boys scattered across the island, was a profound, desperate, universal longing to simply be dry. They sought the only sanctuary the island had to offer, the ancient, gaping mouths of the limestone caves. Saipan is an island carved by time and water, honeycombed with deep, dark fissures and sprawling caverns hidden in the sides of the jagged cliffs. As the rain pounded against the twisted roots of the banyan trees, the young men abandoned their waterlogged foxholes and crawled, slipped, and waded their way into these rocky sanctuaries. Stepping out of the driving rain and into the deep, echoing belly of a cave was like stepping into another dimension. The deafening roar of the monsoon was suddenly muffled, reduced to a low, continuous rumble outside the cave entrance, accompanied by the gentle, rhythmic dripping of water falling from the stalactites high above. The air inside was cool, smelling heavily of wet stone, ancient dust, and the deep, earthy scent of the roots that pushed their way through the limestone ceiling. In the dim, gray light filtering through the entrance, you could see them. Small clusters of exhausted boys huddled together on the uneven rock floor, trying to find a patch of stone that wasn't covered in shallow, muddy puddles. They were shivering, their teeth chattering with a soft, rhythmic clicking sound that echoed gently in the dark. Their uniforms were plastered to their skin, dark with water and stained with the rust-colored clay of the hills. Look quietly at a boy sitting near the back wall of the cavern. His knees are pulled tightly to his chest, his arms wrapped around his legs in a desperate attempt to conserve whatever tiny sliver of body heat he has left. His head rests on his knees, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. He is so deeply, profoundly cold. He closes his eyes, trying to imagine the warmth of the cast-iron radiator in his childhood bedroom back in Pennsylvania, but the damp chill of the cave keeps pulling him back. Suddenly, he feels a movement beside him. The boy he has been walking next to for weeks, a quiet kid from the sprawling farms of Nebraska, shifts closer. Without saying a word, the Nebraska boy begins to unbuckle his heavy, soaking wet pack. His hands are pale and wrinkled from the water, shaking so much he can barely work the stiff canvas straps. He digs deep into the very center of his pack, past the wet rations and the damp extra shirt, until he finds a small, tightly wrapped bundle. It is wrapped in thick, brown wax paper, carefully tied with a piece of twine. He undoes the knot with his trembling fingers and opens the paper to reveal a single, miraculous pair of thick, dry woolen socks. They are the most beautiful things in the world. The Nebraska boy does not put them on his own freezing feet. He nudges his shivering friend. "Take your boots off," he whispers, his voice barely a raspy breath over the sound of the dripping water. The boy from Pennsylvania looks up, his eyes wide, completely uncomprehending. He looks at the dry wool, and then at his friend. "No," he stammers, his jaw tight. "You kept them dry. You need them." "My feet are already numb," his friend replies softly, offering a small, tired smile. "If you don't stop shaking, you're going to rattle the roof down on us. Just put them on." With movements that are almost reverent, the freezing boy slowly unlaces his heavy, mud-caked boots. He peels off his own soaked socks, his feet pale and freezing against the cold rock. When he slides the dry, thick wool over his toes, he lets out a long, shuddering sigh of pure relief. It is an act of everyday heroism so profound, so deeply intimate, that it requires no thanks. The warmth of the wool is not just physical, it is the warmth of absolute, unconditional brotherly love. They sit back against the rock wall, their shoulders pressed firmly together, sharing the precious heat of their bodies, wrapped in the quiet sanctuary of the dark. Further toward the mouth of the cave, another young man is holding a tiny, fragile flame. He has managed to strike a single dry match, sheltering it inside the cup of his hands as though it were the very last spark of light in the entire universe. The small, golden glow illuminates his tired face, casting soft, dancing shadows against the gray limestone walls. He is trying to dry a piece of paper. It is a letter, of course. It is always a letter. The edges are blurred, the blue ink starting to run from the dampness of his pocket. He holds it just far enough from the flame to let the heat touch the paper without scorching it. He is trying to save the words. He is trying to save the small, beautiful handwriting of his older sister, who wrote to him about the birth of her first child, a little girl he has never seen. He watches the paper slowly stiffen in the warmth, reading the smeared words over and over again, letting the thought of a warm nursery and a sleeping infant chase away the deep, heavy gloom of the monsoon. When the match finally burns down to his fingertips, he pinches it out gently, carefully folding the saved letter and placing it back over his heart. He closes his eyes, feeling just a little bit warmer, tethered to the beautiful, distant world of home by a single piece of dried paper. But the American boys were not the only ones hiding in the dark. If you were to walk out of that cavern, step back into the driving, silver rain, and cross the deep, flooded valley, you would find another jagged cliff face. And hidden behind a curtain of thick, dripping vines, you would find another cave. Inside this cave, sitting on the exact same cold, wet limestone, is another young man. He wears a different uniform, a uniform also soaked through, heavy with the red mud of Saipan. He, too, has his knees pulled tightly to his chest. He, too, too, is shivering, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his breath turning to faint white mist in the damp air. He is a boy from a quiet, coastal fishing village in the south of Japan. He is barely 19 years old, far from the gentle sounds of the wooden boats bumping against the docks, far from the smell of roasting fish and salty ocean breezes. He sits in the dark, listening to the exact same rain falling outside his cave. He hears the heavy, rhythmic drumming of the water against the leaves. He hears the deep rumble of the swollen streams rushing through the valley. The rain does not know the lines drawn on a map. It does not know the color of a flag, or the language a boy speaks when he cries out in his sleep. The rain only knows how to fall, washing over them all, an indifferent, magnificent force of nature that reminds them of their shared, incredibly fragile humanity. The young Japanese soldier reaches a trembling hand inside his damp tunic. He does not pull out a weapon. He pulls out a small, silken pouch. It is an omamori, a traditional amulet made for him by his mother at the local shrine before he boarded the great steel ships. The silk is damp, the beautiful, intricate embroidery darkened by the water. He holds it tightly in his palm, pressing it against his cold cheek. In the profound, heavy darkness of the cave, he remembers the day she gave it to him. He remembers the soft rustle of her kimono, the gentle, terrified look in her eyes as she told him to be safe, to come back to her. He remembers the smell of the sweet plum blossoms blooming outside their small wooden home. He closes his eyes, a single, warm tear mixing with the cold rainwater on his face. He does not want to be in this dark, terrifying place. He does not want to walk in the heavy, red mud. He just wants to sit on the woven tatami mats of his living room, drinking a cup of hot green tea, listening to the rain fall gently against the bamboo roof. He wants the exact same thing as the boy shivering in the cave across the valley. They are both caught in the jaws of a vast, unfeeling storm, two sons of the earth, united entirely by their vulnerability, by their cold hands, and by the desperate, beautiful love they hold for the families waiting for them across the dark water. As the long day slowly bleeds into an even darker night, the monsoon continues its heavy, mournful song. The entire island is completely enveloped in the sound of rushing water. Inside the caves, the young men finally begin to succumb to their exhaustion. The boy from Pennsylvania falls asleep, his dry, wool-covered feet tucked safely beneath his friend's heavy canvas jacket. The boy with the match sleeps with his hand resting gently over the dry letter in his pocket. Across the valley, the young Japanese soldier sleeps with his head resting against the cool stone, his mother's silk amulet held safely in his palm. Outside, the mud flows like a slow, red river, washing away the footprints they had left behind. It washes away the tracks of the boots, the indentations of the canvas packs, erasing the physical proof of their struggles. The earth simply takes it all back, smoothing out the scars, blanketing the island in a deep, wet peace. There is no glory in the mud, no cinematic bravery in the freezing rain. There is only endurance. There is the quiet, beautiful resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find a dry corner of a cave and share it with a friend. The rain falls on them all, a gentle, sorrowful lullaby that wraps the weary island in the dark. Sleep now, young men. Let the sound of the water carry your thoughts back to the warm hearths and the safe porches of your homes. The storm is heavy, but you are sheltered in the earth, bound together in the dark by the simple, profound courage of waiting for the sun to rise again. There is a haunting, fragile stillness that falls over a home when the people who loved it are suddenly forced to run away. After days of wading through the heavy, churning mud and the dense, endless green of the jungle, the young men broke through a thick line of swaying ironwood trees and stepped into a space that made them hold their breath. It was not a battlefield. It was a village. Tucked away in a small, sheltered valley, far from the crashing waves of the beaches, it was a quiet collection of modest wooden houses with corrugated tin and woven thatched roofs. It was a place where, just a few days ago, the morning air had been filled with the sounds of sweeping brooms, crying infants, and the soft, familiar chatter of neighbors sharing the day's first pot of tea. But now, it was entirely, profoundly silent. The soldiers did not rush forward. They stood at the edge of the clearing, their boots heavy with red clay, their rifles resting loosely in their hands, suddenly feeling incredibly large and entirely out of place. They felt like trespassers in a sacred, private sanctuary. They moved forward with a slow, hesitant caution, stepping lightly on the packed dirt paths, instinctively trying not to disturb the heavy quiet that blanketed the empty streets. There was no enemy here. There were no shadows hiding in the windows. There was only the sudden, heartbreaking evidence of everyday life, interrupted mid-sentence by the vast, unfeeling machinery of war. As they walked past the small homes, they saw the beautiful, tender care that had been poured into this land. Small gardens bordered the wooden porches, neatly planted with rows of sweet potatoes and vibrant, blooming hibiscus bushes. A rusted bicycle leaned casually against a bamboo fence, its front basket holding a few wilted green leaves. A string of pale, delicate seashells hung from a porch roof, catching the gentle evening breeze, clinking together with a soft, hollow chime that sounded like a quiet, lonely weeping in the still air. A young boy from a quiet farming town in Ohio stepped softly toward an open doorway. The wooden door had been left ajar, swinging ever so slightly in the wind. He hesitated on the threshold. Back home, you did not enter a house without knocking, without wiping your boots and being invited inside. He reached up with a trembling, filthy hand and slowly pulled his heavy steel helmet from his head, a deeply ingrained gesture of respect. He stepped inside. The air in the house was cool, smelling of damp wood, dried flowers, and the faint, lingering scent of cold charcoal from a cooking fire. The main room was small, covered in woven mats that muffled his heavy footsteps. In the center of the room sat a low wooden table. It was set for a meal. The young soldier walked over to it, his heart aching with a sudden, overwhelming sorrow. There were 3 small ceramic bowls resting on the wood. Inside them, portions of white rice had grown stiff and cold. In the center of the table was a delicate, blue-glazed teapot, surrounded by matching, handleless cups. One of the cups was half full, a tiny, perfectly still reflection of the open window caught on the surface of the pale green tea. Beside the bowls lay a pair of wooden chopsticks, resting exactly where they had been hurriedly dropped. He stared at the table, completely mesmerized by the profound tragedy of it. He could picture them. He could see the mother pouring the tea, the father tired from the fields, the child complaining about being hungry. He could imagine the sudden, terrifying sound of the distant thunder rolling over the mountains, the frantic, hushed voices, the desperate scramble to gather whatever they could carry, leaving the warm tea to grow cold in the silent house. He reached out, his rough, calloused finger hovering just an inch above the delicate rim of the teacup. He didn't touch it. He simply stood there, overwhelmed by a wave of pure, universal empathy. He thought of his own mother's kitchen table, of the plates left in the sink when he rushed out the door to catch the train to the recruitment office. He realized, with a breaking heart, that the people who lived in this house were not a faceless enemy. They were just families. They were people who sat down to eat together, who loved each other, who simply wanted to live out their days in peace. He backed away slowly, leaving the table exactly as he found it, a perfectly preserved monument to a shattered afternoon. Out in the dusty street, another soldier was kneeling in the dirt beneath the sprawling branches of a banyan tree. He was a tall, broad-shouldered boy who had spent his youth working in the loud, clanging steel mills of Pennsylvania. But right now, his hands were moving with the utmost, fragile delicacy. He had found a toy. It was a small, hand-carved wooden horse, no bigger than the palm of his hand. It had been dropped in the rush to escape, lying forgotten in a shallow puddle of rainwater. The soldier picked it up gently. The wood was smooth, worn soft by the countless hours it had been held in the hands of a child. It had a mane made of simple, frayed twine, and tiny wooden wheels that squeaked softly when he spun them with his thumb. He knelt there in the mud, staring at the little wooden horse, feeling a sudden, burning lump rise in his throat. He had a younger brother back home, a little boy with a gap-toothed smile who used to run down the sidewalk pulling a little red wagon behind him. The soldier took the edge of his damp, dirty canvas sleeve and carefully, meticulously wiped the mud away from the wooden toy. He dried the little twine mane. He could not bear to leave it in the dirt. It felt too cruel. He stood up, walking over to the nearest house. He gently placed the little wooden horse on the edge of the porch, setting it upright on the dry wood, safe under the overhang of the roof. He placed it there hoping, with every ounce of his exhausted spirit, that the child who loved it would eventually come back to find it waiting for them. It was a tiny, unseen act of everyday heroism. It was a stubborn, quiet refusal to let the war erase the gentleness of the world. As the troops moved slowly, almost reverently, through the rest of the village, they found 100 different stories scattered in the dust. They found a woven sewing basket overturned on a porch, vibrant spools of red and yellow thread unraveling across the wooden floorboards, the needle still pierced through a half-mended piece of dark blue fabric. They found a pair of small, woven sandals resting neatly by a threshold, waiting for a journey that had to be taken barefoot. In one of the homes, a book had been left open on a small desk by a window. The wind was slowly turning the thin, delicate pages back and forth with a soft, papery rustle. Beside the book lay a small, black and white photograph. A group of 3 muddy, exhausted Marines gathered around the desk, leaning over to look at the picture in the dim, fading light. It was a portrait of a family. A father stood tall, wearing a simple, dark suit, his face serious but his eyes carrying a deep, quiet warmth. Beside him sat a woman in a beautiful, intricately patterned kimono, holding a swaddled infant in her lap. She was smiling a soft, radiant smile, looking down at the baby with a look of absolute, unconditional devotion. The 3 American boys looked at the photograph in absolute silence. The silence stretched on, filled only by the rustling pages of the book and the distant chime of the seashells. They did not see an enemy in that picture. They saw their own parents. They saw the universal, undeniable language of a mother's pride and a father's protective love. They recognized the shared, fragile beauty of bringing a child into the world, and the desperate, terrifying lengths a family will go to protect that child when the world catches fire. One of the boys, a medic with tired, hollow eyes, gently reached out and touched the edge of the photograph. "She looks just like my Aunt Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "When my cousin was born, she had that exact same look on her face." The other 2 boys nodded slowly, the weight of the moment pressing heavily against their chests. They had crossed an ocean to fight an empire, but here, in the quiet shadows of this forgotten village, they found only the innocent victims of a storm they had helped bring to the shores. The lines between friend and foe completely blurred, washing away in a tide of profound, shared humanity. They were all just people caught in a terrible, churning tide, swept away from their tea, their sewing, and their quiet lives. As the late afternoon began to bleed into the deep, bruised purples of the twilight, the soldiers sat down on the wooden steps of the empty porches. They did not light cigarettes. They did not talk. They just sat, completely enveloped by the melancholic beauty of the village. Being in these homes, surrounded by the echoes of domestic peace, made their own homesickness ache with a sudden, unbearable intensity. Sitting on the porch of a stranger's house, a young man from the rolling hills of Tennessee closed his eyes and vividly remembered the sound of the screen door slamming at his own house. He remembered the smell of his mother's laundry drying on the line in the summer sun. He felt an overwhelming, desperate longing to just be a boy again, safe in his own bed, far away from the heavy boots and the damp canvas. They sat on the porches of the people they were fighting, mourning for them. They mourned for the half-eaten meals, the dropped toys, the open books, and the terrified families hiding somewhere in the dark, damp caves of the mountains, shivering in the rain. It was a quiet, heavy grief, a collective sorrow for the destruction of innocence. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the packed dirt streets. The wind died down, and the shell chime finally fell silent. The quiet command was passed softly down the line. It was time to move. They could not stay here. The young men rose slowly from the porches. They adjusted their heavy packs, the straps biting into their tired shoulders once again. They walked out of the village with the same hushed, reverent caution with which they had entered. They did not take anything. They did not disturb the sewing baskets or the teacups. As they reached the edge of the tree lane, ready to step back into the dark, tangled jungle, the boy from Pennsylvania stopped. He turned back one last time, looking at the small wooden house where he had left the toy horse. The village looked impossibly peaceful in the fading twilight, entirely frozen in time, holding its breath. He offered a quiet, whispered prayer into the evening air. He prayed that the mother from the photograph would keep her baby warm tonight. He prayed that the family who left their tea would find a safe place to rest. And he prayed that one day, when the thunder finally stopped and the smoke cleared, the children would come back to find their toys waiting for them on the porches. With a heavy heart and a renewed sense of the precious, fragile nature of life, he turned his back on the village. He stepped into the shadows of the trees, following his brothers into the night, leaving the village that time forgot to wait in its haunting, beautiful silence for the dawn of a gentler day. There is a sorrow so incredibly heavy that it makes no sound at all, settling into the heart like snow falling on a quiet, winter sea. High above the shattered cane fields and the muddy valleys, hidden deep within the dark, folded ridges of Saipan, sat thousands of young men who knew, with an absolute and heartbreaking certainty, that they were never going home. We shift our gaze now to the shadows of the limestone caves. These were the Japanese defenders of the island. In the history books, they are often painted with the broad, intense strokes of an empire's ambition. But here, in the damp, quiet dark of the caverns, stripped of the marching bands and the fluttering flags, they were simply sons. They were older brothers, young fathers, and quiet school teachers. They were boys who had been asked to carry a burden far too heavy for their young shoulders, the absolute, unyielding weight of an emperor's expectation. This duty was not a fiery, roaring thing. It was a cold, quiet anchor tied to their souls. It was an unspoken understanding, woven into the very fabric of their upbringing, that their lives did not belong solely to them. They had been taught from the time they were small children, playing with paper kites in the spring winds, that the greatest, most beautiful thing a man could do was to fall like a cherry blossom, in the absolute prime of his life, detaching silently from the branch to blanket the earth in honor. But sitting in the suffocating heat of the jungle, listening to the relentless thunder in the valleys below, the romance of the falling blossom faded. What remained was a profound, suffocating homesickness, and a quiet, desperate love for the beautiful, fragile lives they were about to leave behind. Imagine a young man from the snowy mountains of Nagano. Before he wore the heavy, mud-stained uniform of a soldier, he was a teacher. He spent his days in a classroom made of warm wood and paper screens, listening to the chorus of children reciting their daily lessons. Now, he sits with his back pressed against the cold, jagged wall of a cave. His uniform is torn, his body is weak from hunger, and his throat is parched. But his mind is entirely focused on a small, smooth piece of river glass he carries in his pocket. One of his students had given it to him on his last day of school, a tiny, glowing green treasure pressed into his palm by a small, trembling hand. He rubs his thumb over the smooth glass in the dark. He does not think of the empire. He thinks of the children. He wonders if they are still learning their characters, if they are safe, if they will remember the stories he used to read to them when the winter storms howled outside the classroom window. He holds the glass to his cheek, drawing a beautiful, sustaining warmth from the memory of their innocent, trusting faces. He is just a gentle man, trapped in a dark place, holding onto a piece of green glass as if it were the entire world. Deeper in the cave, where the air is thick with the smell of damp earth and slow-burning charcoal, a quiet ritual is taking place. Several young men are huddled around a tiny, dying ember. They are writing their final letters home. They know, with quiet resignation, that these pieces of paper will likely never cross the vast, dark ocean. They will simply rest here in the soil with them. But the act of writing is a necessary, beautiful release. It is a way to speak across the distance, to whisper into the ears of the people they love most in the world. Listen to the scratching of a small, blunt pencil against a piece of thin, fragile paper. A boy, barely 18 years old, is writing to his mother. He does not write of the terror of the naval bombardments or the agonizing hunger in his belly. He writes an apology. "Forgive me, Mother," he writes, tears pooling in his dark eyes, blurring the delicate ink. "Forgive me for not being there to repair the thatch on the roof before the autumn rains. Forgive me for causing you to weep. Please tell my younger sister that I am sorry I will not be there to see her wear her first beautiful kimono. Tell her I will be watching from the stars." He pauses, taking a slow, trembling breath, struggling to keep his hand steady. "The island here is very warm, but tonight, I am thinking of the cool stream behind our house. I am thinking of the taste of your pickled plums. I have worn the 1,000-stitch belt you made for me every single day. I can feel your hands in every knot. Do not be sad for me. I am at peace." He touches his stomach, feeling the thick, cotton belt wrapped securely around his waist. A Sinanbari. 1,000 women, standing on street corners and in quiet village squares back home, had each sewn a single stitch into the fabric, pouring 1,000 prayers of protection into the cloth. He traces the raised bumps of the red thread in the dark. It is the most precious thing he owns. It is the tangible, physical weight of his mother's love, wrapping him in a warm, protective embrace, even here in the deepest shadows of the earth. He folds the letter with infinite, meticulous care, placing it inside his tunic, right next to his heart, hoping that the earth will somehow carry his words back across the sea. In this sorrowful waiting, the bonds between the men soften into something incredibly tender. The strict, unyielding hierarchy of the military slowly dissolves, leaving only a gentle, shared humanity. An older soldier, a man who used to grow rice in the terraced fields of Kyoto, sees a younger boy shivering uncontrollably near the cave entrance. The boy is terrified, his mind unraveling in the endless, echoing dark. The older man crawls over to him, moving slowly, his joints aching from the dampness. He sits beside the boy and gently wraps his own tattered blanket around the boy's trembling shoulders. He reaches into his pack and pulls out a single, hard biscuit. It is his absolute last ration. He breaks it perfectly in half, placing one piece softly into the boy's dirty hand. "Eat," the older man whispers, his voice low and soothing, like a father comforting a child waking from a nightmare. "Eat slowly." The boy looks up, his eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. He takes a small, hesitant bite. The older man smiles, a gentle, melancholic smile, and begins to sing. It is not a marching song. It is an old, traditional lullaby about a rabbit in the moon, a song every child in Japan knows by heart. The melody floats through the cave, soft and mournful, weaving through the stalactites and the shadows. Other voices, weak but incredibly sweet, slowly join in the dark. They sing of the moon, of the silver grass, of the quiet autumn wind. For a few beautiful, heartbreaking minutes, they are not soldiers trapped on a doomed island. They are a chorus of homesick boys, singing themselves to sleep, comforting each other with the gentle sounds of the world they left behind. The older man rests his hand on the young boy's back, gently rubbing in small circles, anchoring the terrified youth with his own steady, quiet strength. As the song fades, leaving a profound, reverent silence in its wake, the men close their eyes and surrender to their memories. They think of the cherry blossoms. They remember how the parks in Tokyo and Kyoto looked in the spring, transformed into a breathtaking, floating sea of pale pink clouds. They remember walking beneath the trees with their sweethearts, laughing as the delicate petals drifted down to rest on their dark hair, getting caught in the fabric of their coats. They remember the sweet smell of the air and the warmth of the sun on their faces. They remember the ephemeral beauty of it all, the unspoken cultural understanding that the blossoms are beautiful precisely because they do not last. They understand, now, that they are the blossoms. Their time in the sun is over, and the heavy wind of the Pacific is coming to carry them away. But in the quiet dark of the cave, there is no anger in this realization. There is only a deep, poetic sorrow, a quiet acceptance of the turning of the seasons. They sit in the dark, these gentle, tragic defenders, holding onto their river glass, their unsent letters, and their thousand-stitch belts. They look out the narrow opening of the cave, watching the moonlight slowly paint the jagged peaks of the island in a soft, silvery glow. They listen to the distant, rhythmic crashing of the ocean against the coral reefs, knowing that those exact same waves will eventually roll onto the shores of their homeland. They send their love out across the dark water, a silent, invisible tide of devotion washing back to the mothers, the wives, and the children they will never hold again. The night deepens, wrapping the hills in a heavy, peaceful velvet. The echo of the Emperor's command has faded away, completely drowned out by the quiet, beautiful beating of their human hearts. They lean their tired heads against the cool limestone walls, closing their eyes for the final time. Sleep now, young men. Your impossible burden is finally lifting. The cherry blossoms will bloom again next spring, and the wind will whisper your names through the branches. You are forgiven, you are loved, and you are finally resting in the quiet, enduring embrace of the earth. There is a moment just before a great wave breaks against the shore when the ocean seems to hold its breath, gathering all its sorrow into one final, inevitable motion. In the deepest, darkest hours of the night, long before the sun even considered touching the eastern horizon, a profound and heavy shift occurred in the northern hills of Saipan. The limestone caves and the deep, tangled ravines, which had hidden the exhausted, starving remnants of the Japanese defenders, began to slowly empty. It was not a tactical maneuver. It was not a strategy born of maps and measured distances. It was simply the end of the tide. These young men, these fathers and gentle schoolteachers from the snowy mountains and the quiet coastal fishing villages, knew that their time on the earth was drawing to a close. Their supplies were gone. Their medicine had vanished weeks ago. Their bodies were frail, trembling with fever, and completely hollowed out by hunger. But within those fragile, fading bodies burned a devotion so intense, so deeply woven into their souls, that it defies all ordinary understanding. They had been told to give everything, absolutely everything, and now, in the cool, damp dark of the tropical night, they prepared to make that final offering. The preparation was not filled with the roaring shouts of anger or the clashing of steel. It was a procession of heartbreaking, quiet intimacy. In the shadows of the caves, men who could barely stand were being gently lifted to their feet by their brothers. You could hear the soft, rhythmic tearing of cloth as the last, ragged uniforms were ripped into strips to bind wounds that would never heal. Look quietly into the dim light of a cavern entrance. A young boy, his arm wrapped tightly in soiled cotton, is using his one good hand to tie the boots of an older soldier whose eyes are completely wrapped in bandages. The older man places a trembling hand on the boy's shoulder, letting the youth guide him through the dark. They do not speak. The devotion they hold for one another, and for the duty they have been asked to carry, binds them together in a silent, unbreakable pact. If they must walk into the morning light, they will walk together. The blind will be led by the lame. The strong will carry the weak. They gathered in the valleys, thousands of shadows merging into one vast, breathing river of humanity. They carried whatever they could find. Some held rusted rifles without ammunition. Others carried bamboo poles sharpened to a point, or simple walking sticks gathered from the jungle floor. But their true armor was the love they held for their homes. They adjusted their thousand-stitch belts, pressing the red thread against their waists, feeling the phantom touch of their mother's hands. They touched the folded, unsent letters hidden in their pockets one last time, sending a silent, desperate whisper of apology across the dark ocean. And then, as the sky above the Pacific began to bleed from a bruised purple into a pale, milky gray, the tide began to move. It was not a charge. It was a slow, heavy, relentless march. The sound of it was unlike anything the island had ever heard. It was not the mechanical roar of machines, it was the soft, rustling sound of thousands of feet dragging through the tall, dew-soaked grass. It was the collective, ragged breathing of men pushing their failing bodies far beyond the limits of human endurance. It was a sound like a deep, mournful wind sweeping down from the mountains, a haunting, continuous sigh that drifted through the mist. Down in the lowlands, huddled in their damp foxholes, the young American soldiers heard the rustling in the dark. They stopped breathing, their hands tightening around the cold wood of their rifles. They stared out into the thick, gray morning fog, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against their ribs. When the mist finally began to part, what the American boys saw did not fill them with a victorious rage. It filled them with a profound, overwhelming horror and a deep, paralyzing sorrow. Walking toward them out of the fog was a sea of ghosts. They saw men limping, leaning heavily on each other's shoulders. They saw boys who looked no older than their own little brothers back home, their faces pale and drawn, walking with a blank, exhausted resignation. They saw devotion so absolute, so entirely tragic, that it broke the hearts of the boys watching from the dirt. An American boy from the quiet wheat fields of Kansas pressed his cheek against the wet stock of his rifle. Tears mixed with the morning dew on his face, streaming down his dirty cheeks. He did not want to fire. He did not want to break this sorrowful wave. He whispered a frantic, desperate prayer into the mud, begging the figures in the mist to just stop, to turn around, to simply lay down and rest. "Please go back," he whispered, his voice cracking, choking on the heavy, damp air. "Please just go to sleep. You don't have to do this." But the tide could not be stopped. The devotion had been set into motion long before these boys ever set foot on the island, a tragic cultural current pulling them all toward an inevitable shore. The meeting of these two forces was a tragedy of unimaginable sorrow. It was the breaking of the wave against the unyielding rocks. For a brief, terrible span of time, the quiet of the morning was shattered by the desperate, chaotic noise of the collision. It was a storm of heartbreaking futility, a flurry of falling blossoms caught in a violent, unfeeling wind. The energy of the Japanese defenders, fueled entirely by the final, burning embers of their spirits, flared brightly and then, almost as quickly, began to fade. The wave crashed, it broke, and then, it receded. What followed was not a cheer of victory. What followed was a silence so absolute, so incredibly heavy, that it felt as though the entire world had suddenly stopped spinning. The breathless quiet that fell over the island was profound. The mist began to lift, burned away by the rising sun, revealing a landscape that had been completely blanketed by the fallen. The rustling in the grass had stopped. The mournful sigh of the wind had died away. The only sound left on the northern plains was the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the ocean against the distant coral reef, a steady, indifferent heartbeat returning to a world that had just lost its breath. The American soldiers slowly stood up from their foxholes. Their legs were shaking, their faces entirely blank with shock. They moved out into the tall grass, their boots stepping softly, cautiously, as if they were walking through a vast, silent cathedral. They did not walk as conquerors. They walked as mourners. The sheer scale of the sacrifice lay before them, a devastating testament to a duty that demanded too much. The American boys moved among the fallen, their youthful faces aged by the tragedy they had just witnessed. All animosity, all fear, had been completely washed away by the sheer, tragic humanity of the morning. A young American medic, his hands trembling, knelt beside a Japanese soldier who was staring up at the bright, flawless blue of the morning sky. The fallen man was breathing in slow, shallow gasps. The medic did not see an enemy. He saw a boy who was terribly, irrevocably hurt. The medic unscrewed his canteen, cradling the back of the dying boy's head with infinite, tender care. He let a few drops of the cool water fall onto the boy's cracked lips. The Japanese soldier blinked, his eyes focusing for a brief moment on the face of the American leaning over him. He did not find hatred there. He found only a deep, weeping sorrow. The Japanese boy offered a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. He let out a long, slow breath, a sigh that seemed to carry all the exhaustion, all the fear, and all the heavy burdens of the emperor straight out of his small frame. His eyes drifted shut, and he was finally, beautifully, at peace. The medic sat in the grass for a long time, holding the quiet boy's hand, crying softly into the morning air. He cried for the boy he was holding, he cried for his own lost innocence, and he cried for a world that asked young men to walk into the mist and never return. All across the field, similar quiet acts of everyday heroism and profound empathy unfolded. American boys, still covered in the mud of their foxholes, gently straightened the limbs of the fallen. They picked up the dropped walking sticks and the shattered bamboo poles. When they found the small, silken amulets or the folded letters spilling from the pockets of the Japanese soldiers, they did not discard them. They tucked them gently back inside the uniforms, placing them securely over the quiet hearts, ensuring that the men would take the love of their families with them into the earth. As the morning stretched into the afternoon, the island seemed to exhale. The sun shone down, warm and golden, casting long, peaceful shadows over the plains. The tropical birds, which had fallen silent during the storm, began to tentatively sing again from the branches of the banyan trees. The gentle trade winds returned, swaying the tall, green grass back and forth, weaving a soft, green blanket over the resting men. The final tide had come and gone. The desperate devotion was spent. The terrifying, beautiful wave had finally broken against the shore, leaving behind a solemn, heartbroken landscape. The American soldiers sat in the dirt, exhausted beyond measure, their heads bowed in the heavy, silent aftermath. They looked at the quiet fields, united with the fallen in the profound, terrible intimacy of the morning. They understood, in a way that no history book could ever capture, the sheer tragedy of a loyalty that asks for the ultimate sacrifice. The island of Saipan held them all in its warm, tropical embrace. The fighting was largely over. The great, terrible storm had passed. Sleep now, brave and devoted souls. Your long, desperate march is finished. The mist has cleared, the sky is bright, and the ocean is singing a gentle, rhythmic lullaby against the coral. You are bound together forever in the quiet, breathless peace of the fields, resting at last beneath the forgiving light of the sun. There is a place where the gentle green earth simply runs out of room, leaving nothing but the wind, the endless sky, and the deep, waiting blue of the sea. At the very northern edge of the island, the rolling cane fields and the tangled jungles gave way to a towering wall of ancient, sun-bleached limestone. This was Marpi Point. If you were to stand at the edge of these magnificent cliffs on a peaceful summer morning, you would see the Pacific Ocean stretching out like a vast, glittering tapestry of sapphire and turquoise, meeting the horizon in a perfect, unbroken line. The trade winds rush up the face of the stone, carrying the fresh, clean scent of salt spray and the rhythmic, soothing sound of the waves crashing against the coral reefs far below. It is a place of breathtaking, terrible majesty, a place where you feel as though you could simply step off the edge and float into the sky. But on these tragic, heavy days, the cliffs were not a place of quiet reflection. They had become the very edge of the world for thousands of exhausted, terrified families. Driven from their quiet villages and their peaceful farms, the civilian families of the island had been pushed steadily northward by the inescapable machinery of the war. They were not soldiers. They were grandmothers with silver hair, mothers clutching newborn infants wrapped in soiled cloth, and fathers carrying whatever meager possessions they had left tied in small, tattered bundles. They had walked for days through the red mud and the driving rain, their bare feet cut by the sharp coral, their bellies hollow with an aching, relentless hunger. But heavier than their physical exhaustion was the crushing weight of the stories they carried in their minds. For months, they had been fed a diet of dark, terrifying rumors. They had been told, with absolute conviction, that the approaching soldiers were not men, but monsters. They had been convinced that surrender meant a fate far worse than the peaceful dark of the ocean. Driven by a desperate, misplaced love, mothers and fathers looked at their beautiful children and believed that the only way to truly protect them from the horrors of the world was to take them into the sky, to step off the cliffs and let the deep water catch them. When the young American soldiers and the Japanese-speaking interpreters finally broke through the tree line and saw the families gathered at the precipice, their hearts simply stopped beating in their chests. The battle, for these young men, evaporated in an instant. The rifles suddenly felt heavy and entirely useless in their hands. They did not see an enemy waiting at the edge of the world. They saw their own mothers. They saw their younger sisters, their nieces, and the sweet, innocent faces of children who looked exactly like the kids who played stickball in their neighborhoods back home. A profound, suffocating sorrow washed over the young men. They understood, in a sudden, heartbreaking flash of clarity, what the families were preparing to do. What unfolded on the sweeping green grass of the northern cliffs was not a military operation. It was a frantic, weeping plea for humanity. It was an outpouring of love and desperation so intense that it seemed to silence the very wind. Imagine a young American interpreter, a boy who grew up speaking Japanese at his grandmother's kitchen table in California. He steps out from the shadows of the trees, completely leaving the safety of his cover. He unbuckles his heavy canvas webbing, letting his ammunition and his helmet fall into the tall grass. He wants to look as small, as fragile, and as human as possible. He walks slowly toward the edge of the cliff, his hands raised high in the air, his palms open and empty to show he carries no harm. Ahead of him, a family is standing just inches from the sheer drop. A father is holding tightly to his wife's hand, his other arm wrapped protectively around a small boy. They are shivering in the ocean breeze, their eyes wide with a terrifying, absolute despair. The young interpreter stops. He does not shout. He uses the softest, most gentle voice he can summon, speaking the beautiful, flowing syllables of their shared language. "Please," he whispers, his voice carrying perfectly on the wind. "Please do not jump. You are safe. We will not hurt you. We only want to give you water. We only want to give you food. Please, come back to the grass." The father looks back at him, his face a mask of conflict. The propaganda he has been fed screams at him to jump, but the gentle, weeping boy standing in the grass looks nothing like a monster. The interpreter falls to his knees in the dirt. He does not care about his uniform. He does not care about his pride. He presses his hands to his chest, the tears streaming freely down his dusty face, carving clean tracks through the grime. "I promise you," he cries softly, the salt of his tears mixing with the salt of the ocean spray. "On the lives of my own family, I promise you that your child will be safe. Look at my hands. I have nothing. Please, let me give your son a drink of water." He reaches slowly into his pocket and pulls out a small, foil-wrapped piece of chocolate. He unwraps it with trembling fingers and places it gently on the grass in front of him. He unhooks a canteen, takes a slow sip to prove the water is sweet and pure, and sets it beside the candy. He leaves his hands resting in the dirt, entirely vulnerable, weeping openly, pleading with every ounce of his soul for the father to choose life. All along the miles of the jagged coastline, this exact same agonizing scene was playing out. Young men from the farms of the Midwest and the bustling streets of New York were dropping their weapons and crawling forward on their stomachs, inching toward the terrifying precipice. They held out open tins of rations. They held out dry, woolen blankets. They held out their empty, trembling hands. "Don't do it," a soldier from Texas yelled, his voice completely breaking, thick with a sob he could not suppress. He didn't speak a word of their language, but the desperate, cracking tone of his voice was entirely universal. He stretched his arm out as far as it would go toward a mother holding a baby. "Please, ma'am. Give me the baby. I'll take care of him, I promise. Just come back. Just step back." The tragedy of Marpy Point is that, for some, the fear was simply too deeply rooted, the invisible walls of the propaganda too thick to break through. Despite the tears, despite the open hands and the gentle words, some families turned away from the pleading boys. They held each other tightly, wrapping their children in their arms, and simply stepped backward into the wind. They did not fall like stones. To the weeping soldiers watching from the grass, they looked like a flock of tired, beautiful birds taking flight, seeking a peace that the earth could no longer offer them. When they fell, the American boys completely broke. Soldiers collapsed into the grass, burying their faces in their hands, sobbing uncontrollably into the dirt. They pounded their fists against the coral, completely shattered by an overwhelming helplessness. There were boys who had been trained to survive the harshest conditions in the world, but nothing could have prepared their gentle hearts for the profound, devastating sorrow of watching families choose the sea over their outstretched hands. But even in the midst of this unimaginable heartbreak, there were quiet, breathtaking miracles. There were moments of grace that shone like beacons of light through the heavy, gray despair. Back on the cliff edge, the father looking at the kneeling interpreter makes a choice. He looks at the foil-wrapped chocolate resting in the green grass. He looks at the weeping boy from California, seeing the absolute, undeniable sincerity in his tear-filled eyes. He looks down at his own small son, feeling the child's heart beating rapidly against his leg. The father takes a deep, shuddering breath. He closes his eyes, letting the heavy burden of the emperor and the terrifying stories of the propaganda fall away into the ocean breeze. He slowly, deliberately, takes one step away from the edge. Then another. The interpreter does not rush forward. He stays on his knees, holding his breath, crying silently as the family inches their way back onto the solid, safe earth. When the little boy finally reaches out and picks up the small piece of chocolate, the interpreter lets out a long, trembling sigh of pure relief. He slowly stands up, keeping his movements incredibly soft and measured. He picks up the canteen and hands it to the father. As their fingers brush against the cool metal, a profound, beautiful understanding passes between them. The father drinks, the water washing away the dust of his terrifying journey. The mother collapses onto the grass, pulling her child into her lap, weeping with the overwhelming exhaustion of a parent who has just walked back from the edge of the world. The young American boy steps forward and wraps his own dry, woolen blanket around the shivering shoulders of the mother. He sits down in the grass beside them, acting as a quiet, physical shield between the family and the cliffs. He has saved them. Through the simple, undeniable power of human empathy, through tears and open hands, he has pulled an entire universe back from the abyss. As the long, sorrowful afternoon slowly aged into evening, the wind on the cliffs began to soften. The brilliant turquoise of the water turned to a deep, peaceful indigo, and the sky painted itself in bruised, gentle shades of violet and coral. The soldiers slowly led the saved families away from the precipice, guiding them gently back into the sheltering canopy of the trees. They carried the exhausted children on their shoulders, letting the little ones play with the silver buttons on their uniforms. They shared their last rations, breaking crackers into small pieces and feeding them to the grandmothers with infinite, tender care. The heartbreak of the northern cliffs would never truly leave the minds of the boys who stood there. It was a sorrow that they would carry with them long after they returned to their peaceful homes across the sea. But mingled with that deep sorrow was a profound, enduring testament to the beauty of the human spirit. They had looked into the darkest, most terrifying depths of despair, and they had answered it with tears, with compassion, and with the stubborn, desperate belief that every single life is infinitely precious. The cliffs of Marpy Point are silent now. The ocean continues its timeless, rhythmic breathing against the stone, washing away the echoes of the tragedy. The wind sweeps over the tall grass, carrying a gentle, invisible lullaby to those who sought peace in the deep water, and a whispered blessing to the young men who wept in the dirt, whose hearts were soft enough to break for the families they had been sent to fight. Sleep now, let the ocean breeze dry the tears from your faces. The edge of the world is behind you, and the slow, quiet journey toward healing has finally begun. There is a miraculous, quiet softening that happens to a human heart when the thunder finally stops and a frightened child looks up into your eyes. When the great, sweeping storms of the island finally began to settle, leaving behind a landscape forever changed by the heavy winds of the world, a new kind of quiet descended upon Saipan. It was not the tense, terrifying silence of the valleys, nor the breathless, tragic hush of the northern cliffs. It was the hesitant, fragile quiet of survival. In the southern plains, where the cane fields had once swayed in an unbroken sea of green, makeshift villages of canvas and would begin to rise from the coral dust. These were the civilian encampments, hastily built sanctuaries surrounded by tall wooden posts and strands of rusted barbed wire. To look at the wire from a distance, it seemed harsh and unforgiving, a cruel division drawn across the soft earth. But if you walked closer, if you stood in the golden, slanting light of the late afternoon and watched the spaces between the sharp iron thorns, you would not see a prison. You would see the very beginning of healing. You would see the exact places where the heavy, terrifying armor of war was slowly, gently unbuckled and cast aside. The families who walked through the gates of these camps were entirely exhausted. They had lived for weeks in the damp, sunless caves, drinking muddy water from the roots of the banyan trees, hiding from a world that seemed determined to end. Among them were the Chamorro and Carolinian Islanders, the gentle people of the sea, and the Japanese farmers who had crossed an ocean to plant sugarcane. The war had not cared about the differences in their languages or the shape of their homes. It had reduced them all to the same universal, aching vulnerability. But the most heartbreaking arrivals were the children. They walked through the dust in clothes that were far too large, torn at the knees and stained with the red clay of the mountains. Some held tightly to the hands of exhausted grandmothers, others walked entirely alone, carrying the heavy, silent weight of having lost everything they ever knew. Their faces were smudged with dirt, their hair tangled from the rain, and their dark eyes were impossibly wide, filled with a deep, lingering terror of the men in the olive-green uniforms. They had been told these men were monsters, shadows that had come to sweep them away. But the men waiting for them on the other side of the wire were not monsters. They were just boys from Ohio, from the busy streets of Brooklyn and the quiet, rolling farms of Texas. They were young men who were just as exhausted, just as homesick, and just as deeply traumatized by the horrors of the island. And when these combat-weary soldiers looked through the wire and saw the trembling, dusty children, their hearts completely broke open. Imagine a young Marine sitting in the dirt on the outside of the fence. His uniform is stiff with dried mud, his heavy boots unlaced to give his aching feet a moment of rest. He has a rifle leaning against the wooden post beside him, but he isn't looking at it. He is looking at a little girl, perhaps 4 years old, standing just a few feet away on the other side of the wire. She is hiding half of her face behind a wooden post, watching him with fearful, unblinking eyes. She hasn't eaten a real meal in weeks. The Marine does not stand up. He knows his height, his uniform, and the heavy gear he wears are terrifying. Instead, he shifts slowly, making himself as small as possible in the dust. He reaches into the deep, buttoned pocket of his canvas jacket and pulls out a small, foil-wrapped rectangle. It is a simple piece of ration chocolate. It has melted in the tropical heat and hardened again into a lopsided shape, but to a starving child, it is an absolute treasure. The Marine does not call out to her. He knows she doesn't speak his language. He simply unwraps the foil with slow, deliberate, incredibly gentle movements. The crinkle of the foil sounds loud in the quiet afternoon air. He breaks off a small piece of the sweet, dark chocolate and holds it out, extending his hand slowly through the gap in the barbed wire, keeping his palm flat and open. He waits. He breathes softly, offering a warm, tired smile that completely transforms his dirt-streaked face. It is a smile that speaks of front porches and neighborhood playgrounds, a smile that carries no threat, only an infinite, patient kindness. The little girl hesitates. She looks at the chocolate, then up at the Marine's blue eyes. The silence stretches between them, a delicate bridge being built over a canyon of fear. Slowly, ever so slowly, she takes a tiny step forward. Then another. She reaches her small, trembling hand out, her fingers carefully avoiding the sharp barbs of the wire. She brushes against the rough, calloused skin of the Marine's palm, taking the piece of chocolate. She takes a tiny bite. As the sweet cocoa melts on her tongue, washing away the taste of the dust and the fear, a look of profound, beautiful wonder spreads across her face. The Marine's smile widens, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and he feels a heavy, cold knot in his chest begin to melt away. In that simple, quiet exchange through the wire, they are no longer a soldier and a refugee. They are just a kind older brother and a hungry little sister, sharing a moment of sweetness in a broken world. All along the perimeter of the camp, this beautiful, quiet everyday heroism was blooming. Men who had spent weeks surviving the harshest conditions imaginable were entirely disarmed by the innocence of the children. They dug into their packs, bringing out anything they thought might bring a smile. They offered brightly colored hard candies, carefully opening the wrappers so the children wouldn't struggle. They poured clean, purified water from their aluminum canteens into small wooden bowls, watching with profound relief as the children drank deeply, the cool water washing away the dehydration of the caves. Near the medical tents, a gentle medic was performing a different kind of healing. He had spent the last month binding terrible wounds, his hands moving with frantic, desperate speed. But now, he sat on an overturned wooden crate, a basin of clean, warm water resting by his boots. In front of him stood a young boy, his knees badly scraped from a fall on the jagged coral, his tears leaving clean tracks through the thick dust on his cheeks. The medic did not rush. He took a soft piece of clean, white cloth and dipped it into the warm water. "It's all right, little guy," the medic murmured, his voice a low, soothing hum, exactly the tone he would use to calm a frightened puppy back home. He didn't matter that the boy couldn't understand the English words, he understood the melody of the compassion. With infinite, tender care, the medic wiped the dirt from the boy's knees. He dabbed the scrapes gently, blowing a cool breath over the stinging skin to soothe it. He washed the boy's hands, washing away the red clay of the mountains, and then he gently wiped the tears from the boy's face. He applied small, neat white bandages to the knees, treating the minor scratches with the exact same reverence and care he would give to a king. When he was finished, the medic reached into his pocket and produced a small, silver coin. He pressed it into the boy's clean palm, closing the small fingers around it with a gentle squeeze. "For bravery," the medic whispered, tapping the boy gently on the nose. The boy looked at the shiny coin, then looked up at the medic, and for the first time in weeks, a fragile, brilliant smile broke across his face. He threw his small arms around the medic's neck, burying his face in the rough canvas of the uniform. The medic closed his eyes, wrapping his arms securely around the child, holding him tight, letting his own silent tears fall into the boy's dark hair. It was a baptism of safety, a promise that the worst of the nightmare was finally over. As the days passed in the camp, the barbed wire became less of a barrier and more of a gathering place. In the long, humid afternoons, when the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, the Marines would sit by the fence and read their mail. Picture a tall, quiet soldier from the mountains of Colorado leaning against a wooden post. He is holding a letter from his wife, a letter that took months to reach him. Inside the folded paper is a drawing made by his 5-year-old son. It is a simple, chaotic crayon drawing of a green tree and a bright yellow sun. The soldier traces the waxy lines with his thumb, a deep, aching homesickness washing over him. He misses his son with a physical pain that takes his breath away. He looks up from the drawing and sees a group of orphaned island boys sitting in the dust on the other side of the wire, watching him curiously. They have nothing to play with, just handfuls of the white coral sand. The soldier looks back at the letter in his hand, and then at the empty, waxy ration box resting beside his pack. A quiet idea forms in his mind. He carefully sets his letter away in a waterproof pouch. He picks up the stiff cardboard of the ration box and begins to fold it. His large, rough hands move with surprising dexterity, creasing the edges firmly, pressing the corners tight. He is making a paper airplane. When it is finished, he stands up and walks to the wire. He holds the cardboard plane up so the boys can see it. Their eyes track his movement, fascinated. With a smooth, gentle flick of his wrist, the soldier launches the plane over the barbed wire. It catches the evening breeze, gliding in a wide, graceful arc over the dusty camp, before landing softly at the feet of the children. For a second, the boys just stare at it. Then, the oldest one reaches out and picks it up. He holds it aloft, mimicking the soldier's throwing motion, and sends it flying back across the yard. A chorus of delighted, genuine laughter erupts from the children. It is a sound so pure, so incredibly beautiful, that it seems to wash the entire camp in a golden light. Other soldiers see what is happening. Soon, they are tearing pages from old magazines, folding empty ration wrappers, turning anything they can find into small, gliding toys. The sky above the barbed wire fills with dozens of paper airplanes, soaring back and forth between the weary men and the joyful children. The war is forgotten. The fence is forgotten. There is only the simple, universal joy of play, the shared laughter echoing against the darkening sky, stitching their broken hearts back together one folded wing at a time. When the tropical night finally falls over the camp, bringing a canopy of brilliant, icy stars and the cool, sweet breath of the ocean wind, the camp settles into a profound peace. The tree frogs begin their gentle, chiming chorus, and the wind rustles the broad leaves of the breadfruit trees just outside the perimeter. Inside the tents, the exhausted families finally sleep without fear. They sleep on cots provided by the soldiers, wrapped in thick, warm wool blankets that smell faintly of camphor and cedar. They do not have to listen for the sound of falling shells. They only hear the steady, rhythmic pacing of the young Marines walking the perimeter. But these men are no longer walking as guards. They are walking as protectors. They step softly in the dirt, their eyes scanning the dark, ensuring that nothing will ever harm these sleeping children again. A young soldier, walking his post, stops by an open tent flap. He looks inside and sees the little girl who had taken his chocolate earlier that day. She is fast asleep, curled into a small ball on the canvas cot, her breathing slow and even. The wool blanket has slipped off her small shoulders in the warm night air. The soldier unslings his rifle, leaning it quietly against the wooden tent pole. He steps inside, his heavy boots making no sound at all on the packed earth. With infinite, tender care, he reaches down and pulls the warm blanket back up, tucking it gently around her shoulders, exactly the way his own father used to tuck him in when the winter winds blew cold outside his window. He stands there for a moment, watching her sleep, feeling a profound, beautiful sense of purpose. The island had taken so much from all of them. It had demanded a terrifying toll of sorrow and fear. But here, in the quiet dark of the camp, the world was putting itself back together. The hands that had once held rifles were now folding paper airplanes, offering clean water, and gently pulling blankets over sleeping orphans. The healing had begun, flowing freely through the rusted barbs of the wire, a quiet, undeniable testament to the enduring, beautiful resilience of the human heart. Sleep now, little ones. The thunder is gone, the monsters have faded into the mist, and you are watched over by 100 gentle brothers standing quietly in the starlight. There is a stillness that lives deep within the earth, a heavy, listening quiet that waits, ever so patiently, for the light to return. Above ground, the great, terrifying storms of the island had finally blown out to sea. The towering sugarcane fields that had not been burned began to sway once more in the gentle, unimpeded trade winds. The skies above Saipan cleared, returning to a flawless, brilliant blue, and the ocean resumed its soft, rhythmic breathing against the white coral sands. To look at the canopy from the highest ridges, you might believe that peace had entirely reclaimed the island. But beneath the roots of the ancient banyan trees, hidden behind thick curtains of hanging vines and jagged limestone boulders, the shadows still held their breath. The island was hollowed out by time and water, an intricate, sprawling labyrinth of deep caves and subterranean rivers. And down in that absolute, echoing darkness, thousands of souls remained trapped. There were tired soldiers who had fired their last rounds weeks ago, and terrified families who had fled the burning villages, all huddled together on the damp, cool stone. They were completely exhausted, their bodies hollowed by hunger, their lips cracked from thirst. They sat in the pitch black, listening to the slow, steady drip of water falling from the stalactites, entirely paralyzed by the terrifying stories they had been told about the world waiting above them in the sun. For the young American men tasked with securing these final corners of the island, the nature of their duty fundamentally changed. They put away the loud, destructive tools of the battlefield. The grand, sweeping movements of the campaign dissolved into something incredibly intimate and profoundly delicate. This was no longer a mission of conquest. It was a mission of rescue. It was a slow, agonizingly careful exercise in absolute patience, fought with open hands, canteens of clean water, and the soft, reassuring cadence of the human voice. Imagine a young interpreter, a boy who had grown up in the warm, golden valleys of California, his childhood filled with the gentle, flowing syllables of the Japanese language spoken by his grandparents. He stands at the entrance of a massive, yawning cavern. The air rolling out from the darkness is incredibly cold, smelling of wet earth, old dust, and desperate fear. He does not carry a weapon into the mouth of the cave. He unbuckles his heavy canvas belt, letting it fall silently into the soft ferns at his feet. He takes off his heavy steel helmet, allowing the tropical breeze to cool his damp hair. He wants to look exactly like what he is, just a boy, offering a hand in the dark. He steps slowly into the twilight of the cave's entrance, the limestone walls cool and damp beneath his fingertips. He does not shine a bright, blinding light into the shadows. He knows that the people inside are like fragile, frightened birds. A sudden movement or a harsh glare would only send them fluttering deeper into the abyss. Instead, he simply sits down on a flat rock just inside the entrance, crossing his legs, leaning his back against the stone wall. He takes a deep, steadying breath, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom, and then he begins to speak. His voice is not a shout. It is a warm, melodic murmur, echoing softly against the cavern walls, carrying down into the depths like a gentle stream of water. "Hello," he whispers into the dark, his words wrapped in the utmost respect. "Please, do not be afraid. The fighting is over. The sky outside is so beautiful today. We have food for you. We have sweet, clean water. We have doctors who can wash your wounds and make the pain go away. You do not have to hide anymore. Please, come out and see the sun." He waits. The silence that answers him is heavy, thick with hesitation. Somewhere, deep in the cavern, a pebble clatters against the floor. A sharp intake of breath echoes softly. The interpreter does not move. He knows that trust cannot be rushed. It must be cultivated, coaxed out of the earth one tiny, fragile millimeter at a time. So, he sits in the cool dampness for an hour. Then 2 hours. He talks about the world outside. He tells them about the medical tents, where clean, white cots are waiting with warm woolen blankets. He tells them about the gentle medics who are boiling water for tea. Sometimes, when he runs out of things to say about the camp, he simply talks about his home. He speaks of the orange groves in California, the way the blossoms smell in the early spring, and the way the Pacific Ocean looks exactly the same from his shores as it does from theirs. He weaves a tapestry of safe, beautiful words, casting it out into the dark, hoping against hope that someone will catch hold of the thread. Deep inside the belly of the cave, sitting beside a shallow, muddy pool of underground water, an older man listens to the voice. He is a farmer from the northern provinces, a man whose hands are calloused from a lifetime of pulling life from the soil. Beside him sits his young grandson, the boy's head resting heavily against the old man's chest. The boy is incredibly weak, his breathing shallow and slow. The grandfather holds a small, carved wooden top in his hand, a toy he had made for the boy before the world caught fire. He rubs his thumb over the smooth wood, listening to the young interpreter's voice drifting down from the surface. The propaganda he had been told screamed in his mind, warning him of monsters and cruelty. But the voice filtering through the stalactites, it did not sound like a monster. It sounded like a neighbor. It sounded like a young man who was just as homesick, just as tired, and just as deeply human as they were. The grandfather looks down at his sleeping grandson. He knows the dark will not save them. He knows the damp stone offers no future. He closes his eyes, says a silent, profound prayer to the spirits of his ancestors, and makes the bravest, most terrifying decision of his life. He chooses to believe in the kindness of a stranger. He gently wakes the boy. "Come," the old man whispers, his voice dry and cracking. "We are going to see the sun." He lifts the boy, his own legs trembling with exhaustion, and begins the slow, agonizing walk toward the surface. Up at the cave entrance, the young interpreter stops speaking. He hears the slow, shuffling footsteps echoing against the stone. He hears the heavy, labored breathing. He slowly pushes himself up from the rock, stepping backward, out of the cave and into the bright, warm sunlight. He wants the transition to be as gentle as possible. He keeps his hands open, resting gently at his sides, his face painted with a soft, encouraging smile. From the deep shadows of the cavern, a figure slowly emerges. It is the grandfather, carrying the boy. As they step out from the overhang and into the brilliant, tropical daylight, they squeeze their eyes shut, entirely blinded by the sudden radiance. They stand there, swaying slightly in the gentle breeze, expecting the worst, entirely vulnerable to the world. But the world does not strike them. The world reaches out to catch them. The young interpreter steps forward with infinite grace. He does not speak loudly. He simply offers a deep, respectful bow. "Welcome," he murmurs softly. "You are safe now." A medic, who has been waiting quietly in the ferns, steps forward just as gently. He carries an aluminum canteen, the metal cool and covered in condensation. He unscrews the cap and lifts it to the old man's cracked lips. As the clean, pure, sweet water touches the farmer's tongue, a profound, overwhelming transformation occurs. The terrified tension that had locked his jaw and stiffened his spine completely shatters. The water is the undeniable proof of mercy. He drinks deeply, and then, with tears streaming freely down his dusty, weathered face, he guides the canteen to his grandson's mouth. The American soldiers do not rush them. They gather around with quiet, reverent awe, their own eyes shining with unshed tears. They take the heavy, soiled coat from the grandfather's shoulders and replace it with a dry, clean blanket. They gently lift the young boy into their own strong arms, carrying him toward the medical jeeps with the exact same care they would give to a fragile piece of spun glass. This scene, this quiet, beautiful miracle of surrender and salvation, repeated itself hundreds of times across the hillsides of Saipan. It was a painstaking, grueling process of unearthing humanity from the dark. In another valley, a group of combat-weary Marines sat outside a narrow limestone fissure for an entire afternoon. They didn't have an interpreter with them. They only had their own, desperate empathy. They could hear the faint, muffled sound of a baby crying deep within the rocks. The Marines took off their helmets and laid their weapons in the grass. They crawled right up to the edge of the dark crack in the earth. A young corporal, a boy with freckles across his nose and a sweetheart waiting for him in Tennessee, reached into his pack. He unwrapped a small package of field rations, taking out a square of sweet, compressed fruit. He didn't shout into the hole. He simply held the fruit out into the darkness, his arm disappearing into the shadows. He lay there in the dirt, the afternoon sun beating down on his back, his arm completely still, offering a silent, undeniable promise of food. "We're right here," he whispered softly, over and over again, like a soothing mantra. "We're just waiting for you. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere." He lay in the dirt for 3 hours. His shoulder ached, his arm grew numb, but he refused to move. He refused to pull his hand away from the dark. Finally, just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, he felt a faint, trembling touch against his fingertips. It was the soft, hesitant brush of a woman's hand. She gently took the fruit from his palm. The corporal let out a long, shuddering breath, a tear slipping down his cheek and falling into the red clay. He slowly withdrew his arm, and a few moments later, a young mother, clutching her infant tightly to her chest, crawled out of the narrow opening. The corporal sat up and immediately took off his canvas jacket, wrapping it around the shivering woman. The other Marines gathered around, completely silent, offering their own canteens, their own rations, their own quiet, respectful space. They looked at the mother and the baby with absolute reverence. They had spent weeks fighting an invisible, terrifying enemy, but looking at this fragile family, they realized that the greatest victory they would ever achieve on this island was simply bringing these innocent souls out of the dark. Even the last, hidden soldiers deep within the caverns began to feel the pull of the light. Young men who had sworn an oath to the emperor, who carried folded letters to their mothers in their breast pockets, listened to the gentle voices of the interpreters. They looked at their rusted, empty rifles. They looked at the dark, dripping ceilings of their underground tombs. And they realized, with a profound, beautiful clarity, that their duty was not to die in the shadows. Their duty was to live. Their duty was to go home, to rebuild their lives, and to one day read those letters aloud to the people they loved. They emerged from the caves with their hands raised, expecting the harsh, unyielding judgment of the victors. Instead, they were met with tired, understanding smiles. They were met by American boys who offered them a cigarette, lighting it with a cupped hand, sharing the brief, warm glow of the match. They were met by medics who cleaned their wounds and offered them a place to finally rest their exhausted heads. The silence of the caves was finally broken, not by the roar of destruction, but by the quiet, beautiful sounds of healing. It was the sound of a grandfather drinking clean water. It was the sound of a baby being wrapped in a warm blanket. It was the sound of a gentle voice calling into the dark, and the soft, shuffling footsteps of humanity walking back into the sun. As the days turned into weeks, the dark entrances of the limestone caverns were left empty, slowly reclaimed by the creeping vines and the hanging moss. The island of Saipan, which had swallowed so much sorrow, finally began to exhale. The young men who had sat patiently by the cave mouths, who had offered their hands and their hearts to the shadows, had performed a heroism that no metal could ever fully capture. They had looked into the deepest, darkest abysses of fear, and they had filled them with compassion. The earth is quiet now. The stalactites drip their slow, rhythmic tears into the underground pools, but there is no one left in the dark to hear them. The survivors are safe, resting under the boundless, starry sky of the Pacific, wrapped in the enduring, gentle mercy of the boys who waited for them at the edge of the light. Sleep now, let the warmth of the sun soak into your bones. The long night underground is over, and the gentle, forgiving day has finally arrived. There is a profound, aching silence that follows a great storm, a heavy, breathless quiet that settles upon the broken earth like a shroud of sorrow. When the final echoes of thunder rolled away across the vast Pacific, the island of Saipan did not immediately rejoice. It simply stood still. The deafening roar that had consumed the days and the nights was replaced by an emptiness so vast, so incredibly profound, that the young men found themselves listening to the slow beating of their own hearts just to ensure they were still alive. The smoke began to clear, drifting lazily out over the coral reefs, and the bright, unfeeling sun beat down upon a landscape that had been fundamentally changed. The emerald cane fields were scarred, the ancient banyan trees were splintered, and the earth itself seemed entirely exhausted. But the deepest scars were not carved into the limestone cliffs, they were etched into the souls of the boys who had survived. With the fighting finally over, the adrenaline that had sustained them for weeks evaporated into the humid air. In its place came a bone-deep weariness, a heaviness in the limbs that made simply standing a monumental effort. But there was one final, heartbreaking duty left to perform. They could not leave their brothers where they had fallen. They had to give them back to the earth. The small folding shovels, the exact same shovels they had used in the frantic dark to dig shallow foxholes for protection, were unhooked from canvas belts. Now, they were used for a much gentler, infinitely sadder purpose. The rhythmic, scraping sound of metal against coral and soil returned to the island. But this time, it was not the frantic digging of survival. It was a slow, methodical, reverent labor of love. The boys dug quietly, their heads bowed, the tropical sun warming their backs. They dug side by side, creating neat, orderly rows in the quietest, most peaceful corners of the island they could find, near the soft, swaying grasses overlooking the endless blue expanse of the sea. Picture a young man from the dense pine forests of Oregon, sitting in the dappled shade of a torn breadfruit tree. Across his lap rest 2 pieces of pale, splintered wood, scavenged from a broken supply crate. In his right hand, he holds a small, folding pocket knife. He is whittling the wood, stripping away the rough edges, fitting the 2 pieces together into the shape of a simple cross. His hands are covered in the pale dust of the island, trembling slightly as he works. He brings the blade down carefully, carving a name into the horizontal beam. It is the name of his best friend. The boy he had shared a bunk with on the transport ship, the boy who had split his last stick of peppermint chewing gum with him in the holding areas, the boy who had promised to teach him how to dance when they finally made it back to the mainland. As the blade shapes the letters, the young man's vision blurs. A single, hot tear falls onto the pale wood, soaking into the grain. He doesn't wipe it away. He just keeps carving, pressing all of his love, all of his beautiful, aching memories of his friend into the wood. He remembers the sound of his friend's laughter, loud and bright, echoing over the noise of the ship's engines. He remembers the way his friend would nervously tap his fingers against his helmet before a long march. He binds the cross together with a piece of leftover twine, tying the knot with infinite, tender care. It is a humble monument, bare and simple, but it is built with a devotion that rivals the greatest cathedrals in the world. He carries it to the freshly turned earth, sinking the base into the soft soil, leaving a piece of his own heart buried right there beside it. A few yards away, moving softly among the quiet forms resting in the grass, is a combat medic. His canvas bags, once full of bandages and medicine, are empty now. His new task is perhaps the heaviest burden of all. He is collecting the personal effects of the fallen. He kneels beside a boy resting peacefully under a canvas poncho. With gentle, respectful movements, he unclasps the small, metal tags from around the boy's neck, the tiny clinking sound ringing out like a delicate wind chime in the stillness. He reaches into the breast pocket of the boy's damp uniform. His fingers find a small, waterproof pouch. Inside is a photograph, worn at the edges, of a young woman standing on a wooden porch, smiling and waving at the camera. Tucked behind the photograph is a letter, folded so many times it feels like soft cotton. The medic does not read the letter. He knows the words are sacred, meant only for the eyes of the boy who carried it and the woman who wrote it. He holds the small bundle of paper and the metal tags in his hand. They weigh almost nothing, just a few ounces of metal and paper, but to the medic, they feel heavier than a mountain. These are not just objects, they are a lifetime of promises that will never be kept. They are the physical anchors of a broken future. He carefully places them into a small canvas bag, whispering a quiet promise to the resting boy that these treasures will find their way back to that porch, back to the woman waiting by the door. He treats every photograph, every letter, every small pocket watch with the utmost reverence. He is a quiet guardian of their final, fragile connections to home. As the sun begins its slow, golden descent toward the western horizon, the work is finally finished. The island is marked by hundreds of stark, white crosses, standing in silent, orderly ranks against the vibrant green of the tropical foliage. The surviving men gather at the edge of the makeshift cemetery. They do not stand at rigid attention. They lean heavily against one another, their arms wrapped securely around each other's shoulders. The silence among them is absolute, until, from the back of the group, a soft, ragged sob breaks the quiet. It is the sound of a boy from the crowded streets of Chicago, a boy who had fought with unimaginable, quiet bravery, finally letting go. The dam breaks. All around him, shoulders begin to shake. Men drop to their knees in the dirt, burying their faces in their hands, weeping openly, unashamedly, into the warm evening air. They weep for the friends they left in the earth. They weep for the letters that will bring unimaginable sorrow to distant towns. They weep for the terrifying things they have seen, and for the innocent boys they used to be before they crossed the dark ocean. They hold each other tight, burying their faces in the mud-stained shoulders of their brothers, sharing the crushing burden of survival. A tall, quiet sergeant walks among them, placing a firm, warm hand on the back of every weeping boy he passes. He doesn't offer empty words of comfort. He just lets them know he is there, absorbing their grief, letting them empty their heavy hearts into the gathering twilight. He stands as a pillar of quiet resilience, offering his own strength to boys who simply have none left to give. The scars of the earth are deep, but the earth is infinitely patient. Already, small green shoots of grass are beginning to push their way through the freshly turned soil at the base of the wooden crosses. The island, which had been a place of such terrifying noise, now offers a profound, sheltering peace. The ocean breeze sweeps up from the shoreline, rustling the broad leaves of the breadfruit trees, playing a soft, eternal lullaby over the resting men. The survivors sit in the fading light, looking out at the endless expanse of the Pacific. They know they will carry these scars forever, invisible marks etched upon their souls. But they also know they will carry the love, the quiet courage, and the everyday heroism of the brothers they leave behind. Sleep now, beneath the gentle soil. The guns are finally silent. The storm has passed. You are held safely in the arms of the earth, surrounded by the beautiful, unbroken love of the friends who wept for you. Rest in the quiet shade of the tropical evening, knowing that you are cherished, and that you will never, ever be forgotten. There is a strange and beautiful weightlessness that comes when the heaviest burden in the world is finally lifted from your shoulders. The great, terrifying storm that had consumed the island of Saipan had finally broken, leaving behind a profound and echoing stillness. The heavy, suffocating canopy of the deep jungle, the sharp, jagged ridges of the ancient coral, and the dark, damp limestone caves were all behind them now. Slowly, as if moving through a thick, golden dream, the young men who had survived found themselves drawn back to the very edge of the island. They migrated out of the shadows and back to the pale, crescent shores where this surreal, exhausting journey had first begun. But the beaches were entirely different to them now. They were no longer the terrifying thresholds of the unknown. They were simply quiet stretches of sand, meeting the vast, unending blue of the world. With movements that were slow, deliberate, and aching with weariness, the boys walked out from the tree line and onto the sun-bleached coral sand. They unbuckled their canvas webbing, letting the heavy, iron weight of their packs and their equipment slip from their bruised shoulders. The canvas hit the soft earth with a muffled, powdery thud, kicking up tiny, lazy clouds of white dust that drifted away on the breeze. They sat down right there in the open sun. With trembling, calloused fingers, they began to unlace their heavy leather boots. They peeled away the damp, stiff woolen socks that had clung to their tired, blistered feet for weeks. And then, they stepped forward, letting their bare toes sink deep into the cool, wet sand where the tide gently washed ashore. The water of the Pacific Ocean rolled over their ankles, impossibly warm, incredibly soft, and crystal clear. It felt like a physical blessing, a gentle, washing mercy that pulled the red clay of the mountains and the gray ash of the valleys right off their skin, carrying it away into the deep. They sat at the edge of the surf, small clusters of brothers resting their forearms on their knees, staring out at the endless, glittering expanse of the water. There was no grand, roaring celebration. There was no triumphant cheering echoing down the coastline. Survival, they were discovering, did not feel like a victory march. It felt like a hollow, quiet room inside the chest. It felt like suddenly waking up from a deep, terrifying fever dream and finding yourself lying in a quiet, sunlit room, completely unable to process the profound silence. They looked down at their hands, turning them over, marveling at the simple, miraculous fact that they were still here. They watched the blood pumping through the veins in their wrists. They felt the steady, rhythmic rising and falling of their own chests. The realization of their survival was so vast, so incredibly heavy to comprehend, that it simply took their breath away. They were alive. They had walked through the deepest, darkest valleys of the earth, and they had emerged back into the light of the sun. Sitting a little ways down the shoreline, a young man from a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Michigan sits with his knees pulled tightly to his chest. He reaches deep into the pocket of his faded, salt-stained uniform and pulls out a letter. It is a letter he received just days before the transport ships had first arrived at the island. The edges of the paper are frayed and soft as old cloth, stained with sweat and the fine, chalky dust of the coral trails. He unfolds it in the bright, pure sunlight. The handwriting is looping and elegant, his mother's handwriting. She writes to him of planting blue hydrangeas by the front porch stairs. She writes about how the summer heat has finally broken in the Midwest, about the sweet smell of evening rain falling on the hot pavement of their driveway, and how the neighbor's old golden retriever still barks at the mailman every single morning. He reads these beautiful, ordinary words, and a gentle, aching confusion washes over him. He looks up from the paper, his eyes scanning the shattered palm trees and the distant, dark peaks of the island, and then he looks back down at the letter. How can that gentle world, with its blooming hydrangeas and its quiet summer rain, possibly exist on the exact same earth as the suffocating heat of the cane fields and the terrifying shadows of the caves? The two worlds feel light years apart, separated by an ocean so vast it cannot be measured in miles, but only in the profound loss of innocence. He folds the letter carefully, pressing the soft paper against his lips. He knows that soon, he will be going back to that world. He will walk up those porch stairs. He will sit at that kitchen table. But a quiet, private fear blossoms in his heart. He wonders how he will ever fit back into that quiet life. He wonders how he will sit in the parlor and talk politely about the weather or the price of gasoline when his mind is so entirely full of the things he has seen. He wonders how he will ever explain the deep, echoing silence of the island to the people who love him, knowing that the words will never truly be enough. Beside him in the sand sits an older boy, a soft-spoken mechanic from a dusty, sun-baked town in Texas. He has been watching his friend stare at the letter. He sees the quiet, overwhelming sorrow swimming in the younger boy's eyes, and he understands it perfectly because he feels the exact same hollow ache in his own chest. The older boy doesn't offer grand, sweeping philosophies. He doesn't try to explain the unexplainable. He simply scoots an inch closer in the sand, reaches over, and rests a heavy, warm, calloused hand firmly on the younger boy's shoulder. They sit there together, tethered to the earth by that simple, physical touch, watching the turquoise waves roll in and out, creating a soft, hypnotic rhythm against the shore. "We'll figure it out," the older boy whispers. His voice is smooth, steady, and incredibly gentle, barely carrying over the soothing sound of the surf. "We don't have to know how to do it right now. We just take it one day at a time. When we get back, we'll paint the house. We'll fix the car. We'll sit on the porch. We'll just live." The younger boy nods slowly, closing his eyes and leaning into the comforting, solid weight of his friend's hand. In that simple, quiet promise spoken on the beach, the terrifying vastness of the future becomes just a little bit more manageable. He realizes that he will not have to carry these heavy memories alone. They will carry them together. The brotherhood they forged in the mud and the dark will not evaporate when they take off their uniforms. It is a permanent, beautiful bond that will anchor them to the world of peace, helping them to slowly, gently navigate the quiet streets of home. Far out on the horizon, where the brilliant blue of the sky meets the deep indigo of the sea in a perfect, hazy line, the silhouettes of the great transport ships are waiting. They rest peacefully on the water, gray and silent, waiting to carry these tired boys back across the endless ocean. As the soldiers watch the light dance and sparkle on the surface of the water, their thoughts inevitably drift back up into the hills. They think of the boys who will not be walking onto those ships. They think of the friends who are resting in the quiet, green earth beneath the wooden crosses, their sleep undisturbed by the wind or the rain. A profound, beautiful realization settles over the men sitting on the beach. They understand that they are not just leaving the island as individuals, they are taking the spirits of their fallen brothers with them. They are becoming the living vessels of their memory. Every single cool autumn breeze they feel on their faces, every quiet, golden sunset they witness from a front porch, every gentle, loving touch of a wife or a mother, they will experience these beautiful things for the boys who cannot. It is a heavy, sacred burden, but it is carried with absolute, unconditional devotion. They will live beautiful, full, and quiet lives, because they owe it to the friends who gave up their own tomorrows. The trade winds begin to sweep over the Pacific, rushing up onto the shores of Saipan. It is a continuous, soothing whisper of air that rustles the remaining fronds of the palm trees and dances through the tall, salt-bleached grass along the dunes. The wind feels like a gentle, invisible hand brushing across their tired faces, drying the lingering sweat from their brows and the quiet, unshed tears from their eyes. It carries the smell of the salt spray, the sweet, heavy fragrance of blooming plumeria from the undisturbed southern valleys, and the pure, clean, infinite scent of the open ocean. It is the very breath of the world, filling their lungs with fresh, unburdened air. It reminds them that despite the terrible storms that sometimes tear across the earth, life continues. The ocean still breathes. The sun still warms the sand. The earth is constantly, patiently healing itself, and in time, it will heal them too. As the long, slow afternoon softens into a hazy, golden evening, the light turns the turquoise water into a shimmering sea of crushed diamonds. The boys do not move from the edge of the water. They are entirely content to simply sit in the quiet, letting the rhythmic, rushing sound of the waves sync with the slow, steady rhythm of their own breathing. They are just boys. They are sons, and brothers, and sweethearts, forever changed by the shadows of the island, but they are alive. The winds over the Pacific sing a gentle, hopeful lullaby around them, a soft and rushing promise that the hardest part of their journey is finally behind them. The long, terrifying night is over. The journey home is waiting to begin, and the gentle world of peace, with its front porches, its quiet streets, and its blooming hydrangeas, is patiently, lovingly waiting to welcome them back into its warm, forgiving embrace. Sleep now, let the ocean breeze wash over you. You have survived, you are safe, and you are finally heading home. There is a patient, beautiful grace in the way the earth eventually forgives the heavy, trembling footsteps of the past. It has been many, many years since the sky above this island was bruised by the storms of men. The decades have slipped away, one after another, rolling out into the vast expanse of the Pacific like the slow, steady retreating of the evening tide. Time is a gentle river, washing over the sharp edges of history, softening the jagged rocks, and slowly carrying the terrifying echoes of the world far out into the deep, quiet water. Today, the island of Saipan is not a monument to destruction. It is a breathtaking, living testament to the profound, miraculous power of healing. If you were to walk through the dense, green interior of the island now, you would not find the desolate, gray landscapes of the past. The earth has reclaimed its own. The tall, sweet-smelling sugarcane sways once more in the gentle trade winds, creating a vast, rustling ocean of emerald green that stretches out toward the horizon. The ancient banyan trees, whose roots were once splintered and torn, have grown new, sprawling branches that cast deep, cool pools of shade over the limestone paths. The great, heavy machines of war, the terrifying engines of iron and steel that once seemed invincible, have been entirely conquered. But they were not conquered by force. They were conquered by the quiet, persistent tenderness of nature. Imagine a heavy steel tank left behind in a shadowed, sunken valley. It no longer holds any menace. It has been transformed into a quiet, forgotten trellis for the jungle. Thick, green vines wrap lovingly around its rusted treads, securing it gently to the earth. Vibrant, coral-pink hibiscus flowers bloom brilliantly from the spaces in the metal, their delicate petals brushing against the dark iron in the breeze. The rust has slowly turned the metal into a soft, powdery red dust, returning the iron to the soil from which it was born. The earth has simply embraced the scars, weaving them into the vibrant, living tapestry of the forest. And beneath the luminous, turquoise waters that ring the island, the healing is even more profound. The ocean has taken the sunken shadows of the past and turned them into a breathtaking, underwater sanctuary. The coral reef remembers the intrusion, but it does not hold on to anger. Instead, it has grown over the cold steel, covering the wreckage with magnificent, blooming colonies of violet, gold, and pale pink coral. Schools of tiny, silver fish dart peacefully through the open hatchways, and sea turtles glide with slow, ancient grace over the rusted decks. The ocean has washed away the sorrow, transforming the remnants of conflict into a quiet, flourishing nursery of life. It is a gentle, aquatic lullaby, promising that the deep water will always cleanse the wounds of the world. On the pale, sweeping crescent of the western beaches, where the sand is as white and fine as powdered sugar, the air is perfectly still. Walk softly along the water's edge. Here, standing near the gentle foam of the shoreline, is an old man. He wears a simple straw hat to shield his eyes from the golden afternoon sun, and he leans his weight gently upon a smooth, wooden cane. Decades ago, he was just a terrified boy, stumbling through the heavy surf with a canvas pack digging into his young shoulders. His hands, which now tremble slightly with the passage of time, were once gripping a cold rifle in the blinding dawn. But as he stands here today, looking out at the endless blue horizon, there is no fear in his eyes. There is only a deep, quiet, and beautiful peace. He closes his eyes and listens to the island. He does not hear the chaotic, terrifying thunder of his youth. He hears the gentle, rhythmic shushing of the waves, a sound like a mother comforting a child to sleep. Shoo, shoo. He feels the warm, tropical breeze brush against his wrinkled cheek, carrying the sweet scent of blooming plumeria. He remembers the boys who walked beside him in the sand. He remembers the friend who shared his last few drops of lukewarm water in the dark of the cane fields. He remembers the quiet, whispered stories of home they told each other to keep the shadows at bay. He smiles, a soft, melancholic smile that crinkles the corners of his eyes. He lifts a hand, letting his fingers rest gently in the warm ocean breeze, and he whispers a quiet word of gratitude into the air. He tells the ghosts of his youth that he lived a good, full life for them. He tells them about the children he raised, the front porch he painted, and the quiet, snowy evenings he enjoyed back home. He carried their memory through every beautiful day of his life, and now he has brought them back to the sea. The island listens, entirely still, accepting his whispered offering with infinite grace. High up on the northern edge of the island, the towering limestone cliffs of Marpy Point still reach toward the sky. The wind still sweeps up the face of the stone, carrying the scent of the salt spray. But it is no longer a place of heartbreak. It has become a sacred, quiet monument of reconciliation. Standing near the edge of the sweeping green grass is a family. A grandmother, her hair the color of soft moonlight, holds the hand of her young grandson. They have traveled across the vast ocean from a quiet, coastal town in Japan. She was just a little girl when the world caught fire, a child who had been told terrifying stories in the dark. But she is here now, bathed in the warm, forgiving sunlight, to offer a prayer of peace. The little boy holds a tiny, folded paper crane in his hands. It is made of bright yellow paper, folded with immense, careful love. The grandmother kneels in the grass, whispering a gentle blessing, honoring the families who sought the sky, and honoring the young American boys who wept in the dirt, pleading with open hands for them to stay. She understands now, in the quiet wisdom of her years, the profound, tragic humanity that bound them all together in that terrifying hour. The little boy steps forward and holds his small hands out to the wind. He opens his fingers, and the bright yellow crane catches the updraft. It dances over the edge of the cliff, a fragile, beautiful spark of hope floating gracefully above the vastness of the deep blue water. It does not fall. It simply glides, carried by the breath of the Pacific, a silent, colorful message to the heavens that the past is forgiven, that the children are safe, and that love has finally conquered the fear. The true legacy of this island does not only live in the coral reefs or the rustling vines. It lives in small, quiet corners of homes thousands of miles away. In dusty, sunlit attics in the American Midwest, and in quiet, cedar-lined drawers in Kyoto, the most precious artifacts of the island still exist. They are the letters. They are kept in wooden boxes, safe from the rain and the mud. The ink has faded to a soft, ghostly blue, and the paper is fragile, worn entirely soft at the creases from being unfolded and read 1,000 times over the decades. When a great-granddaughter gently touches that piece of paper today, tracing the elegant, looping handwriting of an ancestor she never met, she does not read about the history of empires or the movements of ships. She reads about a young man asking if the apple trees have blossomed in the backyard. She reads a mother's quiet promise to bake a cherry pie. She reads about a little wooden horse, or the faint, lingering scent of lily of the valley. She touches the very same paper that a frightened boy held securely to his chest in the dark of a tropical downpour, pouring all of his courage, his longing, and his devotion into the simple words. This is what survived. The terrifying noise faded into nothingness. The iron rusted into dust. But the love outlasted it all. The quiet, everyday heroism of a boy writing to his mother to tell her not to worry, that profound, beautiful resilience, is immortal. It is a bridge of paper and faded ink that spans the decades, connecting the peaceful present to the quiet courage of the past. Saipan today is a quiet, beautiful guardian of sleep. It holds the memories of all those young men, the farmers from the sweeping plains, the teachers from the snowy mountains, the boys from the crowded city streets and the quiet fishing villages, in its warm, tropical embrace. It does not distinguish between the uniforms they wore or the languages they spoke in the dark. The earth simply opened its arms and took them all in, wrapping them in a soft, green blanket of ferns and vines. As the sun begins its slow, golden descent toward the western horizon, the island puts on a breathtaking display of color. Brilliant streaks of coral pink, deep violet, and warm tangerine stretch across the clouds, reflecting perfectly on the mirror-like surface of the calm ocean. It is the same beautiful sky that the boys watched from their shallow hollows, a timeless, stunning reminder of the grace that exists in the world. The light slowly fades, and the velvet night falls over the island. The sky is not dimmed by the harsh lights of the city. It is a vast, profound canvas dusted with millions of brilliant, icy stars. The Southern Cross hangs low and faithful on the horizon, watching over the sleeping earth just as it always has. The air grows cool, bringing a sweet, refreshing relief from the warmth of the day. The island begins its nocturnal symphony. The millions of tiny tree frogs begin their high, rhythmic chirping, sounding like the gentle ringing of silver bells in the dark. The crickets weave a steady, vibrating drone beneath it, and high above, the ocean breeze catches the tops of the tall sugarcane stalks. The long, stiff leaves rub against one another in the dark, creating a sound exactly like a soft, continuous rain, or the gentle, rhythmic shushing of a mother putting the world to sleep. Shoo, shoo. The fallen are not lost. They are woven into the very fabric of the island's beauty. They are the gentle breeze that cools the evening air. They are the warm, white sand beneath the waves. They are the quiet, sheltering shade of the ancient breadfruit trees. Their sacrifice bought the profound, beautiful peace that now blankets the shores. The ocean laps at the coral reef, a constant, rhythmic lullaby. It whispers a promise to the resting men, and to anyone who will listen in the quiet of the night. It promises that the earth will always heal. It promises that no matter how dark the night becomes, the morning will always bring the sun. It promises that the quiet kindness of sharing a piece of chocolate or holding a friend's hand in the dark is the truest, most powerful force in the universe. You can let go of the heavy burdens of the day now. You can unlace your boots and rest your tired shoulders. The long, exhausting journey through the shadows is completely over. The guns have been silent for a lifetime. The island is at peace, entirely reclaimed by the gentle, forgiving hands of nature. Close your eyes and listen to the breathing of the Pacific. Let the warm, fragrant air of the tropics wash over your mind, carrying away all your worries, all your anxieties, and all your fears. You are safe. The world is gentle, the stars are watching over you, and the coral remembers everything with a heart full of life. Sleep now, deeply and beautifully, wrapped in the quiet, enduring love of the earth and the soft, eternal lullaby of the sea. Good night.